Hello everyone, and welcome back to Haunted Sleep. I know many of you tune in to these stories to help you drift off to sleep, so before you settle in, I'd love for each of you to leave a comment sharing where in the world you're listening from. And if you're enjoying the episodes, don't forget to give a like and subscribe to the channel. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and begin. From the age of 7, I've had what I've always assumed were dreams, dark shadows beside my bed, terrifying me to the core. Everything in the room would be exactly as it was when I fell asleep, so for a long time, I didn't even realize I was dreaming. I'd scream, desperate for my mother to come help me, but she never did. Over time, I realized it wasn't her fault. I was still dreaming, unable to move or look away from those shadows. Though they were just silhouettes, I always felt I could distinguish between male and female forms, and I always sensed they wanted to harm me. The fear stayed with me as I grew older, turning bedtime into a source of dread. Even now, I struggle to sleep because of those memories. One day, a psychic told me something that shook my understanding of these dreams. Without me mentioning them, she said I wasn't dreaming at all. According to her, I had a gift, and the shadows were spirits trying to contact me. She explained that the paralysis I felt was because I had left my body and, for a brief time, had become like them, able to see what others couldn't. She insisted I shouldn't fear them, but instead, ask what they wanted. Skeptical but curious, I decided to give her suggestion a try. I left my light off when I went to bed and waited for the shadows to come. After about a month, they returned, and I had the worst experience yet. I forced myself to stay in the dream, fighting through my terror, and asked what it wanted. This time, the shadows surged toward me, swirling and shifting like flames. I saw flashes of color as it moved rapidly, and its anger was palpable. I woke up feeling utterly drained, my body tingling as if I had exerted enormous effort. I couldn't sleep for the rest of the night. Once, I even had the dream while napping on the couch with the lights on, a first for me. I didn't realize I had fallen asleep because the movie I was watching was still playing. This time, the shadows weren't dark, they appeared as a clear, gentle fuzz, peaceful even. For a moment I wasn't scared. It felt as though they were guiding me, pulling me out of my body. I began sinking into the floor, but somehow, I understood they were trying to teach me how to stay above ground. They reached for my hands, trying to help me. Then I looked over at my body on the couch, and saw the shadows surrounding it. That's when fear gripped me again. I remembered what the psychic had said, that not all spirits are good, and some might try to keep me from returning to my body. Laughing at her warnings once, I now found myself terrified she had been right. I fought to stay above the ground, willed myself back toward my body, and forced myself to wake up. The movie was still playing, exactly where I'd left it. I hadn't missed a single moment. These dreams aren't as frequent anymore, but they still happen occasionally. Over the years, other psychics have told me about my supposed gift. Some claim the shadows are spirits reaching out, and my visions are glimpses of the future. One experience, in particular, stands out. 10 years ago, my sister told me she was pregnant. The moment she shared the news, I had a vivid vision, my sister sitting on a white chair, alone and crying beside a small white coffin covered in pink and white flowers. I told my mother what I saw and that I believed my sister would have a girl, but that the baby wouldn't survive. My mother was furious, accusing me of cursing the child, and told me to keep quiet. Eventually, the family heard about it, and it became a topic of discussion until we all moved on. My niece was born, but she died at just 10 months old from a rare genetic condition. Her coffin was white, with pink and white flowers, just as I'd seen in my vision. The only difference was that my sister wasn't alone. Her family surrounded her. After the funeral, my sister confided in me, saying she hadn't picked the flowers or the coffin. Her mother-in-law had. Over the years, I've had other visions. Pregnancies, deaths, accidents, illnesses. They come as fleeting glimpses or feelings of dread. 9 times out of 10, something happens afterward. Family members sometimes ask me if I see anything about their lives, but I can't give them answers. The visions come unbidden, and I have no control over them. Lately, they've become less frequent. Even the feelings of dread are rare now. In some ways, it's a relief, but in others, it leaves me questioning. Do I really have a gift? Was any of it real? Sometimes I laugh at myself for believing these dreams were anything more than my imagination. Other times, I can't shake the feeling that there's more to it. Even now, I'm not sure if I want it to be real or not. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. First, let me say this. I don't believe in ghosts. I live in a small mining town called Blackwater, and my friends and I are seen as outcasts because of how we dress and the music we listen to. Most people call us goths or emo. One Friday after school, we decided to go to the town memorial and talk to ghosts, as a joke. It was just after sunset when we got there, and we sat around, pretending to talk to the spirits of our deceased friends. Nothing happened, of course. I didn't feel any strange presence or experience anything unusual. No surprise there. At some point, my closest friend, Justin, got a call from his brother, telling him he was supposed to be home already. We all decided to head to his place since that's where we were staying for the night. As we left, I joked about how silly it was, and Justin called out into the night, "You can come stay at my house. I don't want to be lonely." We all laughed, knowing nothing was going to happen. When we got to his house, his mom was angry about how late we were. As punishment, she sent everyone home except me. I was close to Justin's family, and usually got a pass when it came to things like this. After dinner, we decided to play Halo using System Link so we could play in separate rooms. Less chance of screen peeking. I went to the guest room to play, but the TV I was using wouldn't turn on. I tried everything but couldn't get it to work. Frustrated, I told Justin, and he offered to switch rooms with me. The moment he turned the TV on in the guest room, it worked perfectly. I brushed it off and spent hours playing with him. Later, when we got bored, we sat on his balcony to chat. I placed my glass of Coke near the center of the table, but while we were talking, Justin told me to move it away from the edge. Confused, I glanced over and saw the glass teetering close to the edge. I moved it back to the middle and continued our conversation. A few minutes later, we were interrupted by the sound of glass shattering. Justin grabbed a dustpan and came back out, saying, "I told you to move your glass." I tried to explain that I had moved it, but he just shrugged it off. "It's just a glass, man," he said. I let it go. Feeling tired, I lay on the couch and dozed off while watching Rage. That's when I had the dream. In the dream, I couldn't see anything, but I could hear a firm voice, angry, commanding, telling me to leave. It sounded like an angry father scolding his child. The dream left me uneasy. I woke up to find Justin's brother standing over me. Groggy, I asked him what was wrong. He said, "While I was sleeping, I heard someone telling me to leave. I woke up and could still hear it, so I came to see if it was you." I laughed it off, saying I must have been talking in my sleep, but deep down, I wasn't so sure. After that night, strange things began happening whenever I visited Justin's house. Objects moved on their own, lights flickered, and I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Recently, I finally told Justin about how uncomfortable I was feeling. He laughed and said, "Oh yeah, that ghost is my best buddy. I told him to mess with you." I laughed too, not sure if he was serious. Then he added, "Ghosts go home with Petty. I don't want you anymore." Petty is my nickname because I'm short. Again I laughed, thinking it was just a joke. That was 4 days ago. Since then, I've been having nightmares every time I fall asleep. I wake up drenched in sweat, feeling nauseous, and I've even vomited several times. I went to the doctor, but they found nothing wrong with me. My family thinks I'm making myself sick on purpose to lose weight, but that's not true. I don't know what's happening, but it's starting to freak me out. I was born on May 5th after what my mother describes as a harrowing pregnancy and an even more difficult labor. She often recounts every painful detail, her eyes welling with tears, as though reliving the ordeal every time she tells it. My grandmother, back when she was alive, always added at the end, "Who would have thought you'd make it, after all your mother had been through, and losing those two ones the previous year?" When I was old enough to understand, I felt a strange discomfort whenever I heard about those ones. The phrase hung heavy in the air, yet I didn't dare to ask for more details until I was a little older. Finally, I confronted both my mother and my Nona. My grandmother spoke first, while my mother listened quietly, nodding along. "The first time your mum was pregnant, she lost the baby after a month," Nona said. "The second time, it was a boy. She lost him when she was 4 months along. But now everything is okay, because you're here." "And where are they now?" I asked, to which she replied, "They're safe in heaven, where God is taking care of them for us." At the time, heaven sounded like a mysterious, scary place. Why couldn't we visit them? As I began to grasp the meaning of death, the concept grew even more unsettling. I would ask Nona if people stayed the same after passing on, and she'd assure me, "Yes, of course." Her response only deepened my anxiety. While I didn't mind the idea of meeting my brother, I was terrified of encountering my other sibling, imagining an undeveloped form or embryo. It sounds silly to me now, but as a child of 7 or 8, it haunted me. I grew up constantly feeling like I wasn't alone in bed, but I brushed it off as a byproduct of my childhood fears. Even now, I believe that's all it was, or at least I tried to. Years later, at 20, I participated in an exchange program and found myself studying in Australia at La Trobe University. During my free time, I hung out with 2 younger cousins, 3 Australian friends, and a girl named Ga, an African student who claimed to have supernatural abilities. She often invited me to join her seances, but I always declined. Something about her made me uneasy, perhaps because I couldn't tell if she was genuine or simply eccentric. Eventually, after much persuasion, I gave in and joined them one night. From the start, I knew it was a mistake. Guy explained that the seance wasn't about contacting deceased relatives, but guardian spirits. These spirits supposedly offered protection but could only be invoked through a strong prayer, otherwise they might harm us. I wanted to leave, but since we were in an isolated area and couldn't safely leave alone, Ga warned me that staying outside the circle would make me vulnerable. Reluctantly, I stayed. The seance began with her chanting in a language I didn't understand, singing and making dramatic faces. My terror gave way to skepticism. It felt over the top, almost like a performance. She acted as a medium, channeling spirits that answered questions. Occasionally, someone would fall into a trance, which I found unconvincing. Gradually, I relaxed, convinced it was all theatrics. Then she turned to me. "The spirit now wants you," she said. I had the opportunity to ask questions, so I avoided anything trivial or predictable. Instead, I asked safe questions like, "Which country will I go to next?" Or, "Will I ever return home?" But as I spoke, I began to feel unwell. My stomach churned, my body ached as if with the flu, and a cold sweat broke out on my skin. Ga's voice sounded distant, and I felt distracted by something I couldn't identify. Then, just as suddenly, I felt better, but with an unsettling sense that I had missed something. When I regained full awareness, I noticed my youngest cousin holding my hand. The seance continued, but I felt shaken and disconnected. Once it ended, everyone looked exhausted, and I felt deeply distressed. Back at home, I asked my cousins what had happened while I was under. My youngest cousin, Helen, told me I had become visibly upset, saying, No, stop!" repeatedly. Then, according to her, I said, "I'm on the 5th of May, not June or January." I froze. May is my birth month. June and January, I later realized, were the months my mother had miscarried her pregnancies. My cousins couldn't have known this. My mother had never spoken of it to them. I tried to dismiss it as coincidence, but the unease lingered. That was the first, and last, time I ever participated in a seance. Though I want to believe it was all coincidence, a part of me fears that something more sinister was at play. If those were spirits trying to communicate, I know my siblings wouldn't want to harm me. Whatever it was, I'm certain now it wasn't a benevolent presence. I don't want to encounter it again. Ever since I was a child, my mother would share stories about our family's encounters with spirits. My grandfather, for example, had many strange experiences when he was a child in the Philippines. When he was about 6 or 7, he would go with his father to the local church at 1 a.m. for prayers. I never understood why they went at such an odd hour. His father told him to stay silent and not be afraid, no matter what he saw or heard. While they knelt at a pew, my grandfather often glanced at the altar. He would see glowing shapes of people coming out of the walls and walking down the aisle toward the graveyard outside. He even heard faint sounds like whimpering and swooshing as these figures passed by. As a child, I thought of these stories as nothing more than bedtime tales. My mother also had her own experiences. She claimed she could see people who had passed away as if they were still alive. She said they would cry or go about their daily tasks, seemingly unaware they were no longer in this world. I found it fascinating but never took it seriously. It was just part of growing up in our family. It wasn't until I had my first strange encounter that I began to think differently. In 1993, I moved into a small apartment with my boyfriend. He worked long hours during the day and attended classes at night, so I often spent evenings alone. One afternoon, around 2 p.m., I decided to take a nap before he got home. As I lay in bed, somewhere between asleep and awake, I felt someone lie down next to me, leaning gently against my back. I assumed it was my boyfriend and thought nothing of it. But something felt strange. He usually hugged me or kissed me when he came home, and this time, he didn't. Feeling more awake, I turned over to face him, but there was no one there. The bed was empty, yet I could still feel the lingering presence of someone beside me. It left me shaken, but nothing else happened after that. A year later, we moved out of that apartment. My boyfriend and I got married and started a family, but unexplained things still happen from time to time. One morning, around 7 a.m., the house was quiet, and everyone was still asleep. I got up to use the bathroom. As I walked through the hallway, I glanced at the living room and noticed a girl with long black hair sitting in front of the TV. The TV was off, which seemed strange, but I assumed it was my eldest daughter. I glanced back toward the lounge, and the girl was gone. Confused, I opened my daughter's bedroom door. She was still in bed, fast asleep. My heart raced as I realized what I had just seen. I quickly finished in the bathroom and went back to wake my husband. Still half asleep, he mumbled, "Maybe they're trying to contact you," and went back to sleep. These moments leave me feeling both curious and uneasy. I've shared my experiences with close friends. Some think it's fascinating, while others are unsettled by the idea that I might be seeing spirits. I often wonder if I'm imagining it all or if I'm truly experiencing something unexplainable. There was one time when I felt a dark, malevolent presence, but that's a story for another day. For now, I'm still trying to figure out whether I should believe or dismiss these experiences, and how to handle them if they're real. It was August 12, 2000, an evening we had been dreading for months. The phone rang around 9 p.m., delivering the news we had been expecting. My mother had passed away quietly, with a nurse aide by her side. At least she wasn't alone in her final moments. In May of that year, my mother was diagnosed with cancer. By the time it was discovered, The disease had already spread throughout her body. The doctors couldn't even pinpoint its origin. It was terminal, and they estimated she might have 3 years left. Instead, we only had 3 months. The cancer had eaten through her thigh bone, and she was moved into a hospice in the city. We lived 30 to 45 minutes away, in the suburbs. A week before she passed, my dad asked her a difficult question. "If anything happens to you, do I have your blessing to remarry for companionship?" She looked at him and said simply, "Yes." Nothing more was said after that. The night she passed, I told my husband I wanted to go see her. We were told we could visit the hospice anytime to say our final goodbyes. It felt so final. My dad, who was staying with us, told us to let him know in the morning if the call came. He would say goodbye then. The kids were already in bed, and my husband's cousin offered to watch them while we went. When we arrived at the hospice, we walked into my mom's room. The atmosphere was warm, but the sight of her broke me. She was propped up on her bed with pillows, but her body looked empty. Just days before, she had been smiling through her pain. Now there was no life left. Her eyes were partially open, and her skin felt cold to the touch. I couldn't breathe. I bolted from the room, overcome with a desperate need to leave. My husband tried to comfort me, and the nurses kindly offered me tea, but I just wanted to go home. We got to the car parked on the street, but when my husband turned the key, the engine wouldn't start. He tried again and again, but the car was dead. It had been running fine earlier that day, so we were baffled. Then it hit me, Mom. It felt like she was stopping us from leaving. I couldn't go back into the hospice though. The thought was unbearable. My husband suggested push-starting the car. I decided to push while he worked the ignition and clutch. We struggled, pushing the car down the street, but it wouldn't start. We turned it around and tried again. Exhausted and emotional, I cried out, "Please, Mom, let us go!" As if by some miracle, the car roared to life. I whispered, "Thanks, Mom." Was it just a coincidence? Maybe. After the funeral and a period of grieving, something unexpected happened. 2 weeks later, my aunt approached my dad with surprising news. During her final week, my mom had asked her to find a woman in the Philippines. All she knew was the woman's name, and the region she might still be living in. This woman had been my mom's schoolmate in high school, though they hadn't seen each other since. We were stunned. Mom didn't know if the woman was married, had children, or was even alive. My aunt used her connections in the Philippines, and soon they tracked her down. She was a primary school teacher, still living with her mother and unmarried. The odds of finding her were incredible. Before long, my dad and the woman began corresponding. She eventually came to Australia to meet us. When I saw her for the first time, I was speechless. She was small and slim, with the same hairstyle as my mom. From a distance, she could have been mistaken for her. But there were differences. She was warm and affectionate in a way my mom never was. She opened her heart to us, her smile lighting up the room. A year later, my dad married her. Now I call her Mom, and my kids call her Grandma. There's one final twist that feels like more than coincidence. Both my daughters share the same birthday as my mom. Mom, February 5th, 1938. First daughter, February 5th, 1994. Second daughter, February 5th, 2000. It feels as though Mom is still watching over us, her presence woven into the fabric of our lives. Last night, June 25th, 08, I spent the evening at my friend's sister's apartment to play Super Smash Bros. Brawl on the Wii. When we arrived, Elle, not her real name, casually told me, "You might see something, but don't be scared." I looked at her, confused, wondering what she meant. As we walked up to her apartment, I whispered to my friend, "What did your sister mean? Is this place haunted?" Without a hint of emotion, as if it were the most normal thing in the world, he replied, "Yep." My stomach dropped. "Oh," was all I managed to say. I couldn't help feeling a mix of fear and nervous anticipation. This would be my first close encounter with anything remotely paranormal. My mind raced, imagining waking up in the middle of the night to a ghostly face hovering over me. When we got into the apartment, everyone went to change. I ended up alone in the living room, constantly glancing over my shoulder, thinking, how long does it take to get changed? The silence wasn't helping my nerves. Elle eventually came out and asked me what I'd like for dinner. Embarrassed and trying to keep my cool, I said, "It's up to you." She insisted, though, saying I was the guest. Blushing because, let's face it, I had a bit of a crush on her, I softly suggested pasta. She asked what kind, and I quickly said carbonara, because it was the only thing I could think of. While Elle cooked in the kitchen, I sat on the couch, chatting with her and half watching Big Brother. At around 7:25 p.m., we suddenly heard a loud thump. My whole body stiffened. I looked around nervously, and Elle, in a playful, eerie voice, said, "It's here!" Terrified, I bolted into the kitchen, standing close to her. "Where? Everywhere?" I stammered. She laughed. "It's not just going to show itself like that. It'll appear when you least expect it." Her words didn't reassure me, they made me want to go home. But Elle assured me the ghost was harmless, and wouldn't do anything to scare me. She asked me to trust her. My friend finally came out of the shower and casually asked, "Did you see it?" I shook my head and said, "No." By then, dinner was ready, so we sat on the couch to eat while watching Rules of Engagement. Then we heard another bang, followed by the sound of water running in the bathroom. I jumped up, looking around frantically while Elle and my friend burst out laughing. Thinking it might be a prank, I laughed nervously too. Elle went to check the bathroom, while my friend and I kept eating. When she came back, the lights started flickering. This time, I panicked and moved closer to Elle. That's when I saw it. It wasn't a person or a clear figure, just a blob of some sort. It moved along the ceiling, darting from corner to corner. Each time it tried to descend, it seemed to be pulled back up. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Elle, calm as ever, explained, "It always does this. Same pattern, over and over." I pulled out my phone to try and capture it, but every time I snapped a picture, the blob would already be in another corner. It moved faster and faster, and Elle's tone shifted. "It's never done this before. Put the phone away," she said urgently. As I tucked my phone away, the lamp's bulb exploded. We all screamed. Elle quickly grabbed some incense, lighting it while apologizing to the spirit on my behalf. Gradually, the blob slowed down and then disappeared. The room was silent. The TV, which none of us had turned off, was now off. Shaken, I muttered, "I want to go home." My friend and Elle tried to calm me, but I was convinced I had upset the spirit. I couldn't imagine trying to sleep there, worrying about what it might do next. That night was unforgettable. Whether it was the spirit's usual behavior or a reaction to me being there, I'll never forget the chilling experience of being in that apartment. I wasn't ready for a close encounter, and I'm not sure I ever will be. A couple of years ago, something strange happened to me and my wife. It was one of those experiences that sticks with you, not just because it was unsettling, but because it was undeniably real. My wife was with me the whole time, so I know I didn't imagine it. We were coming back from a social event on a Saturday evening, taking a back road to avoid the weekend traffic. As we drove, I suddenly saw a man running towards the road from a nearby field. I slowed down, startled, and despite my wife's unease, I pulled over to see if he needed help. He looked desperate and shaken. The man didn't appear out of the ordinary at first. He was wearing blue jeans, a blue jumper, and had a large beard that made him look older, though if I had to guess, I'd put him at around 50. But something about him unnerved my wife. She chose to stay in the car, gripping her phone tightly, just in case. As I approached him, I noticed he was unnaturally pale, almost glowing white despite having apparently run across a muddy field. He was trembling badly. In a frantic tone, he explained that he'd been picking mushrooms in the adjacent field when two young men attacked him. He claimed they were vicious, but he managed to escape and ran toward the road, hoping to find someone to help. Even after losing the attackers, he hadn't stopped running, too scared to slow down. Something about his story didn't sit right with me. For one, he didn't have any visible injuries, no bruises, scratches, or even signs of a struggle. He seemed terrified, but there was no physical evidence of the attack. Still, I asked how I could help. That's when he broke down, saying he was too afraid to cross the field again to get home. I offered him my phone to call someone, but he declined, saying he lived alone and didn't really know anyone nearby. This wasn't unusual. We live in a small rural community about 40 minutes from the nearest town. Many people here prefer isolation, living in secluded shacks or cottages. Despite my wife's death stares, I offered to drive him home. He said it was about 5 minutes away via a dirt track or 10 to 15 minutes by road. Naturally, we chose the road. By now, even I was starting to feel uneasy. As we drove, the man, who introduced himself as Robert, spoke openly about his life. He mentioned moving to the area years ago, his ex-wife, and the fact that he had no children. He also said he planned to report the attack to the police the next day. It all seemed normal enough, but I couldn't shake the odd feeling. When we reached his home, it was exactly what I expected, a small, rundown shack. Robert thanked us and got out of the car. I watched as he walked toward the door, but just as he reached it, my wife tugged urgently at my arm. I turned to her for a split second, and when I looked back, he was gone. There was no sound of a door opening or closing. My wife, too focused on leaving, admitted she hadn't been watching him. The uneasy feeling deepened. Against my wife's protests and threats of leaving without me, I got out of the car to check if Robert was okay. I walked up to the house, calling his name, but got no response. The door was slightly ajar, so I peeked inside. The place was completely abandoned. Cobwebs draped every corner, and the air reeked of decay, likely from rats. The house had clearly been empty for years. I checked around back, where there was an old, broken-down shed, but no car, no signs of life. The whole area felt eerily still, as though no one had lived there in a very long time. Hearing the car engine revving, I hurried back. My wife wasted no time speeding off the moment I got in. We've rarely spoken about that night since. When we asked around, no one in the area seemed to know about Robert or the house. I've always considered myself a skeptic, someone who doesn't believe in the supernatural. But that experience has stayed with me, leaving me to wonder if everything in this world is as it seems. It was strange, unsettling, and undeniably real. This story happened during the summer of 2006, if I remember correctly. My best friend at the time, James, was sleeping over at my house. Back then, we were inseparable, spending almost every day of the holidays together, and having countless sleepovers. We also shared a fascination with the paranormal. One night, after a swim in my pool, we were on the computer researching ghosts and spirits. That's when we stumbled upon information about Ouija boards. Neither of us had heard of them before, but we read about how they worked and were immediately curious. When it was time for dinner, we sat at the table, and I brought up our discovery with my mom. She told us that when she was around 14 or 15, she used to use Ouija boards with her mom and aunt. She said they only did it about 5 times, but the stories intrigued us even more. James and I begged her to let us try one. After about 15 minutes of persistent pleading, she reluctantly agreed. We set up the board on the coffee table. My mom made it herself, cutting out letters of the alphabet and arranging them in a circle, with yes at the top and no at the bottom. We used a small shot glass as the planchette. With our index fingers lightly touching the glass, my mom explained the rules. You have to believe it will work and keep an open mind. Be respectful to the spirits, and treat them as you would want to be treated. Then, she began by asking, "Are there any spirits present?" To our amazement, within about 20 seconds the glass moved to "Yes." James and I exchanged wide-eyed looks that said, "I'm not moving it. What the hell is happening?" My mum asked a few more questions, but the responses didn't make sense at first. The glass spelled out random gibberish, like SKDFHSFSHFKJHSFH. She then asked, "Can we speak to someone who speaks English?" The glass moved to "Yes." James and I wanted to try speaking with our best friend, Daniel, who had passed away 2 years earlier. We asked if he was there, and when the glass moved to confirm, we started asking him questions, things only Daniel or our close friends would know. The glass answered correctly every time. When we asked who he wanted to talk to, the glass slid toward me so forcefully it almost fell off the table. My mum then asked Daniel if he was safe in heaven, with the angels, and if he was okay. The glass moved to "Yes." At that point, James and I were both crying. We weren't sad, it felt like a wave of relief, knowing Daniel was at peace. After a while, my mum wanted to speak to her own mum, my Nana, who had passed away 4 years earlier. We asked Daniel if it was okay, and the glass moved to "Yes." We thanked him and said goodbye. My mum asked if Nana was there, and the glass moved to "Yes." When we asked who she wanted to talk to, it spelled out Sally. Sally wasn't my mum's real name, her name is Penny, but it was a nickname my Nana always called her. Hearing that felt deeply personal and real. We talked with Nana for a while. She said she loved us, missed us, and assured us she was okay. Then, suddenly, the glass stopped responding. For about 2 minutes, there was complete silence. My mum asked, "Is anyone there?" The glass didn't move to "Yes" and "Oh," or any letters. Instead, it began moving in fast, clockwise circles. James and I were terrified. My mum quickly said, "Goodbye," and we took our fingers off the glass before packing everything up. Looking back, after talking to my youth group leaders and reading more about Ouija boards, I've learned they can be dangerous. Many say they're tools of deception and that the entities communicating through them aren't who they claim to be. It's possible we weren't speaking to Daniel, or my Nana at all. But if the board is truly evil, how do I explain the comfort we felt? When we asked if Daniel was safe in heaven with angels, the glass said, "Yes." Was that a lie? Or was it real? To this day, I still wonder. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. About 6 weeks ago, I experienced something that still unsettles me. I was at my friend Doug's house with a group of friends while Doug was at work. Earlier in the day, the girls in the group had used a Ouija board and seemed visibly shaken. Seeing their reaction, a few of us convinced them to try it again. We wanted to see what had spooked them. The girls were hesitant, but after some convincing they agreed. We set up the Ouija board and began, starting with a few chants. At first, one of my friends kept joking around, talking, and pushing the glass, clearly nervous about what might happen. After a while, we told him to stop and restarted the session without him. We placed our fingers lightly on the glass and asked if anyone was there. After a few minutes, the glass slowly moved to "Yes." None of us were moving it, but it slid across the board, leaving us stunned. When we asked who the spirit was, the glass moved toward "Open," before returning to the center. This repeated, and then it spelled out, "Open you give." We didn't understand what it meant, but things quickly took a strange turn. The computer in the room started booting and rebooting repeatedly, faster than seemed possible. The lights flickered, gradually intensifying, and a bowl on the table began grinding slowly on its own. While I found it thrilling, the girls were terrified. They insisted nothing like this had happened earlier. Then things got worse. Kylie's small dog, normally friendly and playful, started pacing up and down the hallway, clearly agitated. Suddenly, it lunged violently at Kylie's neck. Although it didn't cause serious harm, its behavior shocked us all. Realizing something was very wrong, we asked the spirit if we could leave. The glass moved too. No. We tried pleading, but it refused. Finally, we asked one by one if we could leave. Each time, the spirit gave permission, except for Luke. It told him, no, 3 times before pausing at, wait. On his 5th attempt, the glass slowly moved toward, yes. Just as we thought it was over, one of the girls screamed. She pointed to Doug's parked bus outside. Through the light shining from the street, we saw a shadowy figure moving inside the bus. None of us dared to approach it. Every time I looked at the bus, I felt a heavy, oppressive presence watching me. I eventually stopped looking. It was too much. Minutes later, someone claimed to see a figure dart into the nearby reserve. I had to cross that reserve to get home, but I wasn't willing to risk it. Instead, I borrowed a bike and took the long way, sticking to the streets. Even then, I felt like something was following me. The entire ride home, I couldn't shake the sense of being pursued. Once I got home, I left the light on and said a prayer. The oppressive feeling finally lifted, and I managed to fall asleep. The next morning, strange things continued. While getting ready for school, my radio turned on by itself, rapidly flicking through stations. Amid the static, I heard a voice say, "Do you feel like something evil is about to happen to you? Well, it just might." Then the radio went silent. It was a cheesy advertisement voice, but it terrified me. Later, I turned on the shower radio, trying to see if the same thing would happen. At first, it was just static. But when I touched it, the stations played clearly. When I pulled my hand away, it went back to static. I repeated this a few times, trying to rationalize it as something scientific. For the next few weeks, small, odd things happened, but nothing I couldn't explain. Then, about 2 weeks ago, something truly frightening occurred. It was around 2 or 3 a.m., and I couldn't sleep. Outside my bedroom door, there's a strip of material to protect the carpet. Light filters through the bottom of the door, and when someone walks past, their shadow temporarily blocks it. As I lay there, I heard strange noises in the hallway. Watching the door, I saw a shadow move past, followed by the light under the door becoming brighter. The material outside had been pushed aside. I got up, dreading what I might find. Something had paused outside my door before moving on. I checked on my sister, who was sound asleep, then went to my dad's room. He was asleep too, but I woke him and told him what had happened. Together, we searched the house. I carried a meat cleaver, gripped by the same heavy, oppressive feeling from before. We found nothing, but I knew something had been there. It wasn't just my imagination, and it knew exactly which room was mine. Two years ago, a close friend of mine passed away in a violent car crash. I've never thought of myself as someone sensitive to spirits, but I often feel his presence. How do I know it's him? I just do. There have been moments in my life when I've sensed something that wasn't physically there, and this is one of those cases. I talk to him sometimes, see him in my dreams, and even feel his touch. I know he doesn't like appearing in my dreams because they always have to end, and I hate that too. He's the only person I've lost in my 23 years, and I miss him deeply. There have even been times when he's appeared in photographs I've taken, like one New Year's Eve. He looked sad in the image. Despite the sadness, I've never felt afraid or threatened when he visits. I treasure these moments. This leads to my latest encounter. Recently, I've been researching spirits and trying to better understand how to become more aware of their presence. One night, after hours on the computer, I turned it off and went to bed. My husband was asleep on the couch, and I decided to leave him there since he's hard to wake. As I settled into bed, I suddenly felt uneasy. My attention was drawn to the corner of the room near the head of the bed. I sensed something was there, even though the hall light shining into the room made it clear there was nothing physical. I thought I saw a misty shape in the corner, but when I strained to get a better look, it was gone. Were my eyes playing tricks on me? I tried to brush it off, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was there. I knew it wasn't my friend. He always lets me know he's there through his familiar touch. This presence felt different. I was initially scared, but as I lay there, I realized I didn't feel threatened, just uncomfortable. It felt as if someone unfamiliar was standing there, watching me. Trying to ignore it, I turned away and closed my eyes, hoping it would go away. But then, the air around my face grew noticeably colder. I opened my eyes, but there was nothing visible. Still, I felt as though whatever it was had moved closer, kneeling beside the bed and facing me. I've read a lot about spirits, so I mustered my courage and politely asked it to leave, explaining that it was making me uneasy. To my relief, it backed off. Even though it was gone, I couldn't fall asleep. I considered waking my husband, but I knew he'd dismiss it and tell me to go back to bed. Exhaustion eventually got the better of me, and I started drifting in and out of sleep. That's when I heard the voices. They were distant and muffled, but unmistakably there. I believe there were two men, talking to each other. I was in that strange in-between state, not fully asleep but not entirely awake either. I tried to listen, to make out what they were saying, but I couldn't remember anything. I know it wasn't a dream, it felt too real. At some point, I must have fallen into a deep sleep, because I woke up the next morning without stirring once during the night. Maybe I imagined all of this. Maybe I spooked myself after spending so much time researching spirits. But if it was real, I can't help but wonder, what did it want from me? Why did it come to me? Maybe I should have asked, but I guess I'll never know. Nothing unusual had happened to me for months until January 10th. One of my closest friends, Madison, had recently gotten engaged. Her fiancé proposed to her on January 1st, 2008, right at midnight. It was a complete surprise to all of us, including Madison herself. It was such a happy and memorable moment, and I couldn't have been more excited for them. The couple moved into a stunning apartment gifted to them by Madison's wealthy uncle as both an engagement and wedding present. The wedding was set for 2010. A week later, Madison invited me to stay over and check out the apartment. Since I was on annual leave, I gladly accepted and brought my girlfriend along. The apartment was incredible, better than a double-story house. Everything, from the bathrooms to the bedrooms and kitchen, was luxurious. For the first 2 nights, everything was perfect, with nothing unusual happening. But on Saturday morning, January 10th, between 4 and 5 a.m., Madison woke up screaming. Her fiancé, Matt, wasn't there since he had gone to his parents' place for the night to help with their bathroom renovations. Hearing her scream, I ran to her bedroom to check on her. She was crying and mumbling, saying, "I don't want to. I don't want it to happen to me." I comforted her, assuring her it was just a nightmare. Eventually, she calmed down, even laughing at herself for overreacting. My girlfriend woke up and asked what had happened. I explained, and she decided to stay in Madison's room with her until sunrise. Meanwhile, I couldn't go back to sleep. Once I'm awake, I stay awake, so I turned on the TV, set the volume low enough not to disturb anyone, and made myself a cup of tea in the kitchen. While stirring my tea, I felt a cold breeze pass by. I didn't think much of it at the time, assuming it was coming from the open window. However, the breeze came from a direction it shouldn't have, though I wasn't focused on that then. When I returned to the lounge, I noticed the TV channel had changed. I assumed I'd accidentally changed it earlier and didn't give it much thought. About an hour later, I noticed movement on the balcony. My heart raced as I thought we might have an intruder. I woke the girls up without telling them what I saw, just in case we needed to act quickly. I grabbed the gun Matt had mentioned for emergencies, feeling both powerful and terrified holding it. As I stepped out of the laundry room, I heard the girls screaming. I rushed to the bedroom and saw a shadowy human figure near the bathroom door. Without thinking, I fired the gun. The bullet went straight through, and the figure dissipated into smoke. Madison was hysterical, crying and shaking, saying, "He's the one who ruined Eve's wedding." Confused, I asked who Eve was. Madison explained that in her nightmare, she saw the events through Eve's eyes. During Eve's wedding, she noticed a faceless man at the end of the aisle. When she turned to her husband-to-be, his face was decaying. Eve screamed, and everyone at the ceremony began bleeding from their eyes, their mouths falling apart. The faceless man flew toward Eve, and that's when Madison woke up. The dream freaked us all out, but we tried to laugh it off the next day. Things were calm until Monday, January 12th. Around 11 p.m., we were watching a movie with Matt, who had returned by then. Suddenly, we heard the sound of plates and utensils falling in the kitchen. When Matt and I went to check, everything was perfectly normal. The girls were terrified and wanted to leave, but I assured them ghosts couldn't hurt us. Later that night, while lying in bed, we started hearing rumbles and bangs on the walls. My girlfriend whimpered, so I turned on my iPod for some light and music to calm her down. Soon, Matt and Madison joined us in the room, saying they'd heard the same noises. We decided to stick together in the lounge. The rumbling grew louder, and then we heard a guttural moaning sound. "You're..." My girlfriend screamed at it to leave us alone. The TV suddenly switched off, and a face appeared on the blank screen. We all screamed and ran out of the apartment. We spent the night at Matt's parents' house, which was only 15 minutes away. The next day, Madison told her uncle what had happened. He claimed he'd never experienced anything unusual in the apartment before. Regardless, Madison and Matt moved out, and her uncle bought them another place to live, this time, thankfully, not haunted. Matt and I are planning to go back to the apartment to talk to the current residents, and see if they've experienced anything similar. Even now, I'm left with so many questions. Why did this happen to us and not Madison's uncle? What was the nightmare about? And who, or what, was that shadowy figure? Some things, I guess, will always remain a mystery. When I was 4 years old, we had a sweet little Chihuahua named Tommy. He was my sister's dog, and we adored him. One day, my other sister accidentally let him out of the house, and he ran straight down the road, where he was tragically hit by a car before we could reach him. I saw him lying on the side of the road, and it broke my heart. I cried so hard. A kind old man offered me a plush Snoopy to comfort me, but I turned it down, saying, "It's not my doggy." To this day, I can't listen to a certain Elton John song. It was playing shortly after Tommy passed, and even now, over 20 years later, it brings tears to my eyes. After my brothers buried Tommy in the yard, something strange happened. We heard frantic scratching at the back door, just as if Tommy were there trying to get in. It scared me as a child, and my mom, worried and confused, asked my brothers to check if Tommy's grave had somehow been disturbed. But his grave was untouched. Each time we opened the door, no one was there. It was heartbreaking and unsettling. Even now, I still miss him. Years later, another loss broke my heart. My beloved Chihuahua cross, Foxy, had a litter of pups, all of whom found loving homes, except for one. Everyone loved her and said how cute she was, but no one ever wanted to take her home. Eventually, she stayed with us, and we named her Moo Moo because of her black and white cow-like patches. She was a lively, happy puppy, but one day she started to look tired. I thought it was just the heat making her sleep more. Then, suddenly, she became weak and started having convulsions. I panicked and didn't know what to do. We rushed her to the vet, but her condition worsened. She fought so hard, crying in pain as I held her close, talking to her and trying to comfort her. The vet thought she had a slight chance of surviving, so we left her overnight for monitoring. The next morning, I got the devastating news: Moo Moo had passed away. I wasn't there for her in her final moments, and that still hurts. The vet assured me it was the best decision to leave her there, but it tore me apart that I couldn't hold her one last time. We buried Moo Moo in a box of flowers and kept a tiny clipping of her fur, which the vet had shaved to place a drip. I put it inside a heart-shaped pendant I'd wanted for months and finally bought. The pendant rests in a small soapstone container that I keep on a shelf near a statue of Jesus. Sometimes, I leave little dog treats near it because Moo Moo was such a happy, playful pup. I like to think it would bring her joy. Last night, I was thinking of her and started crying. After hours of memories flooding my mind, I opened the pendant, touched the fur inside, and remembered her big eyes and wagging tail. Suddenly, I felt like she wanted me to wear the pendant and go to sleep with it on. I couldn't rest until I did. When I finally put the pendant on, I felt a wave of sadness followed by a sudden, freezing cold sensation, like an Arctic breeze passing over me. Then I heard something that startled me, the sound of a puppy running and playing on the carpet. It was so clear, the light panting, the tiny claws skittering on the floor. I woke later that night to the same sounds. It wasn't her little sister, who was outside in the courtyard with her mom. The noises continued, playful panting and the quick, light steps of a puppy dashing around the room. I don't know what to make of it, but I'd like to think it was Moo Moo letting me know she's still here, still happy, and still playing like the joyful pup she always was. This has to be the dumbest thing I've ever been a part of. While reading stories about Ouija boards online, I started wondering why I'd never experienced anything like that myself. Back in high school, I tried using a cheap, homemade Ouija board with friends during a free period, but none of us took it seriously. It was one of those cardboard ones that looked like a novelty item from a magic shop. When I brought this up, my friend Daniel, who considers himself an expert in the paranormal, said, "The problem was you didn't believe in it." Before I knew it, he had gathered 5 white candles and announced that we were going to try it properly. I felt a mix of excitement and fear, remembering the stories I'd read online. Daniel reassured me, explaining that as long as the candles were lit, they would form a barrier, trapping any spirits inside. I still have no idea where he gets his information. He called our other 3 friends, who were downstairs playing Street Fighter 4, and told them to join us. Daniel set up the candles in a star pattern, a pentagram, and lit them. He told us to sit outside the star but within the circle formed by the candles, placing the Ouija board in the center. One of our friends, Kira, couldn't stop laughing, which only added to the tension. We started asking questions, but Kira burst out laughing again and joked, "Is your ectoplasm like your jizz?" We all cracked up, unable to take it seriously. Daniel snapped at us to stop messing around. Then, all of a sudden, the pointer moved to 3. Daniel froze and said, "Don't move it!" None of us had touched it. We all took our hands off the pointer, and it jerked slightly to the left on its own. Craig shot up and yelled, "What the hell was that?" The rest of us stood there, staring at each other, but Daniel placed his hand back on the pointer and told us to do the same. Craig refused, saying, "No way, man. I'm not getting possessed." Daniel yelled at him until he reluctantly sat down and joined in. Daniel asked, "What does 3 mean?" As the pointer moved to 2, the room grew silent. The tension was suffocating. I felt a mix of fear and disbelief. This was actually happening. I told Daniel we should stop, recalling the stories I'd read about Ouija boards. Daniel agreed, but just as we let go of the pointer, it shot straight to 1. Panic set in. Daniel bolted outside and came back with a bell and incense. He tried lighting the incense using one of the candles, but the flame blew out on its own. One by one, the other candles extinguished themselves. The room was heavy with fear. Rick suddenly screamed and backed away from the door, causing the rest of us to fall over in fright. "What's wrong?" we shouted. Rick, pale and trembling, said he saw a man with half a face standing in the doorway. Chills ran down my spine as we all moved away from the door, too afraid to look at it. Then Craig vomited out of nowhere. I grabbed Daniel's arm, desperate, and shouted, "Do something!" Daniel lit the candles again, threw the incense onto the board, and set it on fire. After a few seconds, the oppressive atmosphere lifted. We still felt weak, but the heaviness in the room was gone. Rick was shaking, Kira stared into space in shock, and Craig lay down on the bed, drained. Danielle and I quietly cleaned up, both of us shaken to the core. The days following were far from normal. Every morning, I woke up with a pounding headache that only stopped when I lay back down. Rick kept seeing flashes of the half-faced man every night at exactly 9 p.m. Craig woke up randomly during the night, gripped by an overwhelming sense of fear. Kira couldn't be alone in his house anymore, convinced someone was watching him. And Daniel started hearing whispers at night. Even now, my headaches come and go, and no medication seems to help. I'm going to see a doctor this weekend, but a part of me wonders if this all started with that stupid board. I can't shake the feeling that we've messed with something we shouldn't have. I've been experiencing paranormal activity since I was about 12 or 13. I'm 21 now, and these encounters have only grown more intense over the years. As a teenager, my friends and I would conduct seances and intentionally scare ourselves. At the time, we didn't realize how dangerous it could be. Strange things happened, and eventually, we stopped experimenting, understanding we were playing with forces we didn't understand. When I was 16, my family moved into a very old house that my uncle used to live in. I still remember the first few days after moving in. I was home alone when I heard the sound of a PowerPoint clicking on and off in the next room. I knew it was a spirit, but it didn't feel threatening. As time passed, I started noticing there was more than one presence in the house. Sometimes, I'd feel completely at ease, like the spirit was benign. Other times, I'd feel uneasy and on edge, as though something was watching me. That's how I realized there were multiple entities. Friends who visited often mentioned feeling like they were being watched. One even said it felt like an old man was there, which resonated with me. I'd felt the same. Although the house was unsettling, I lived in a bungalow in the backyard rather than the main house. 2 or 3 years ago, I started noticing a presence in my room. It felt like I was being watched from one particular corner, and I'd often hear cracking noises. I also felt like I wasn't welcome there, which made staying in the bungalow increasingly difficult. 18 months ago, I had a bizarre experience. I thought I was dreaming when an angry-looking woman walked toward me and slapped me across the face. I woke up holding my cheek. I've always wondered if I was in a semi-sleep state, or if it really happened. Other strange things started happening. Items would go missing, like my TV remote, which I've never found despite turning the room upside down. Water droplets would fall on me out of nowhere, and I even went through a phase of sleepwalking. In the past year, things have escalated. It feels like the spirit doesn't want me to sleep. Just as I'm about to drift into a deep sleep, I'll hear loud thuds, cracks, or objects falling. I've also woken up with bruises on my knuckles without explanation. In the last 2 weeks, it's become unbearable. I've heard footsteps circling my bed, the strings on my guitar being plucked, the blinds moving, and loud bangs on the walls. One night, it scared me so much that I slept inside the main house. But I worried I was giving the spirit the upper hand, so the following night, I went back to the bungalow. Everything was fine, until the night after, when the activity resumed. One night I sat up in bed and said out loud, "Do you want to start, Dia?" Immediately, a poster ripped off the wall, and items flew out from under my bed. That was the last straw for the night, and I went back inside to sleep. 2 nights ago, I tried smudging the bungalow. I even cleared out the corner where I always felt I was being watched, removing surfboards and other items stored there. That night, everything was quiet, and I thought the smudging had worked. But the very next night, the activity returned. Around 8:30 p.m., I went to bed, and it began, tapping on the windows, footsteps running outside, and the sound of objects being thrown from wall to wall. Terrified, I went inside the main house again. Even in the main house, things happen, though they don't feel as targeted. Last night, while sleeping in my mum's bed, I woke up to the sensation of something hovering above my face. Then it was gone. Later, I woke up twice to the feeling of being shaken. I've experienced this in the bungalow too. My granddad passed away in late 1959, before my dad was even born. He was killed in a car accident caused by a drunk driver at the age of 44. Growing up, my older brother and I were always encouraged to talk about him, so he never felt like a stranger. We'd often take our Nana to the cemetery to leave flowers at his grave. As kids, we'd climb all over his headstone, playing as children do. While our mum was horrified, Nana would laugh and say, "Oh, don't worry, Bill would love it." The first time I experienced my granddad's presence was when I was about 5 or 6 years old. At the time, we lived in New Zealand. Winters were cold, so I'd sleep in my brother's room, which was warmer. His bed faced the landing, and the door was always left ajar with the hallway light downstairs left on for me. One night, I woke up and saw a white, glowing figure of a man walking up the stairs. He reached the landing, paused between my parents' room and my brother's room, and seemed to look into each room before moving out of sight. I wasn't scared. It felt natural somehow. I just rolled over and went back to sleep. Years later, when I was 13, we moved to Australia. Our new home always felt a little eerie to me, and I was convinced it was haunted. Mum dismissed my worries, even after a family friend, who was a medium, visited and mentioned that she didn't feel anything unusual. Still, strange things happened. One night, I woke up to the sound of the kettle boiling in the kitchen. When I went to check, the kettle had been left on so long that the plastic base had melted. No one could explain why it had turned on. Mum brushed it off, but it stuck with me. By the time I was 17 or 18, things became more intense. Mum eventually admitted that the medium had told her my granddad was the one visiting the house, checking in on us. Once I understood it was him, the fear faded. He started making his presence more known, particularly to me. At first, it was small things. The ceiling fan or TV would turn off by itself. Then it became more direct. On my dad's birthday, I had a day off university and was baking a complicated cheesecake as a surprise. While I was mixing ingredients, the kettle behind me suddenly started boiling. I flicked it off and said, "Hey, Granddad, I know you're just checking in on Dad for his birthday." The interactions felt protective, especially during a difficult relationship I went through about 8 months ago. I started noticing that whenever the man I was dating stayed over, the light in my room would turn off, but without the usual click of the remote. It felt like the light dimmed gradually, almost as if someone was trying to say, "I'm here, and I don't like this guy." Looking back, I wish I had listened. After we broke up, Granddad's presence was constant. One day, a close friend who has a gift for sensing things turned to me and said, "Has your granddad been hanging around? There's this calm energy surrounding you today." It was comforting to think he was there during such a rough time. As things improved in my life, his visits became less frequent. One day, while chatting with Mum about his presence, I noticed what looked like a shadow at the front door. It was tall, about Dad's height, and I assumed it was him. But when I checked, Dad was outside cleaning the pool, nowhere near the veranda. Mum was unsettled, but I just said, "It's probably Granddad dropping by. I've heard that Dad looks just like Granddad, so maybe that's why I mistook the shadow for him." More recently, I started dating again. One night, the new guy was over, and we were joking around when the lights switched off. I turned it back on, smiling to myself, knowing it was Granddad checking him out. A few nights later, the same thing happened. Since then, I haven't felt his presence, but I know he'll visit again when the time is right. Granddad's visits always felt more like a protective presence than something to fear, and I'm grateful for that. It's comforting to know he's still watching over us. Do I have a ghost at work? Well, here's my story. It all began when my aunt and I started a cleaning business, taking on subcontract work for office buildings. One of the jobs we took was a 3-level office space that required 4.5 hours of cleaning 5 nights a week. Initially, when my Aunt Debbie worked with me, there wasn't much to report, aside from her constantly asking, "What do you want?" as if I'd called her. The thing was, I hadn't called her at all. This strange misunderstanding went on for months, but I brushed it off. When Debbie left to focus on family, I hired someone new to help with the workload. That's when things took a turn. One night, as we cleaned the second level, a terrible stench wafted through the kitchen in the common area and slowly took over the entire floor. Dismissing it, we carried on to empty waste paper bins in the main office. That's when we heard the rattling of the double glass doors. At first, I thought it was someone entering the office across the hall. But when it happened again, we checked, only to find no one there. You can imagine how scared we were. Determined to finish quickly, we moved to the first level, sticking close to each other out of fear. Bathrooms, kitchens, everything was done together. I'd left the keys, a set of about 10, on a table just inside the main glass doors. But when we returned from emptying bins, the keys had vanished. We searched everywhere but found nothing. Feeling panicked, we called security to escort us to our cars. The next day, the staff found the keys in the men's bathroom, the very first place we had looked. Over time, other odd occurrences became routine. Cleaning chemicals would go missing and turn up in places we'd never put them. Phones would randomly start playing the radio and stop when we walked away, as if triggered by some unseen hand. But last night was the worst. The staff member who started before me called, her voice trembling. She told me she'd heard a woman's voice say, "Hi," but she was completely alone in the building. Terrified, she waited downstairs until I arrived with my uncle, who occasionally helped out. Together, we went upstairs, and everything seemed calm, until later. While helping Jody take out some rubbish, I took the lift back up to find Carrie and finish setting alarms. As I stepped out of the lift, I saw the vacuum cleaner but no sign of Carrie. Then, from my left, I heard laughter. Startled, I turned, but no one was there. Moments later, Carrie emerged from the glass doors on my right. When I asked him if he'd been laughing, he denied it. We packed up and headed back downstairs. But when we realized the mop was missing, we all took the lift back up to the first floor. We found it, but on our way back down, something made my stomach drop. There were 4 people in the lift. Not 3, 4. I only caught a glimpse, but it was enough to send chills down my spine. I said nothing until we reached the ground floor, too frightened to speak. In the cleaning room, we tried to shake it off. The room was large, and we sat at the table, thinking we were safe. That's when Jody started freaking out about the light. We all looked up to see the fluorescent tube light, hanging by chains, swinging wildly. Carrie steadied it, and we tested to see if anything, like closing the door, could have caused it. Nothing did. The light only moved when we physically pushed it. That was the breaking point for me. Today, I resigned. I'll finish out the month, but I can't continue working in that office. I've never been so scared of something I couldn't see in my life. I was staying at my grandparents' house, where my aunt and her 2 children also lived. My aunt was scheduled for a hospital visit the next day and had to take a large dose of laxatives to prepare, so I stayed over to help with the kids since my grandparents were away. My cousin Stephen was to sleep in his own room, farther down the hall, while I stayed in Kate's room. Kate was sharing our grandparents' room with our other cousin, Rachel. My aunt planned to sleep on the couch so she wouldn't disturb anyone with her frequent trips to the bathroom. As everyone settled in for the night, I lay on Kate's bed, waiting for my aunt to turn out the light. I was about 11 years old at the time, and wasn't particularly fond of the dark. As I lay there with my eyes closed, I suddenly felt a pawing sensation at the end of my legs. Assuming it was one of their many cats or dogs, I looked up to see which one it was, but there was nothing there. The sensation didn't stop, and it left me uneasy. Moments later, my aunt came to the door, handed me their new kitten to keep me company, and turned off the light. I lay in bed, petting the kitten to calm my nerves, but the cat suddenly bolted out of the room, its fur puffed up and its eyes fixed on the wall behind my head. I felt a sudden chill, even though it was summer, and moments earlier the room had been warm. The bed was positioned next to a window, and I could hear everything outside clearly. As I lay there, trying to relax, I heard the sound of two men talking outside. At first, I thought they were just walking past the yard, but something about their conversation struck me as strange. The language they were using was formal, almost old-fashioned, unlike anyone I'd expect to hear in this small town. Curious, I got up to look outside, but there was no one there. Yet, I could still hear their voices. Trying to shake it off, I lay back down, only to be startled by the sight of my cousin Kate's outline in the hall. Scared and annoyed, I yelled at her and chased her back to our grandparents' room, shutting the door behind her. Still unsettled, I returned to the bed, but sleep wouldn't come. The voices outside had stopped, but the cold sensation returned, sending a shiver down my spine. As I turned toward the door to find an extra blanket, I froze. In the dim light, I saw the outline of a little girl standing in the doorway. My stomach dropped. It couldn't be Kate. This girl was shorter, with much longer hair. The door hadn't made a sound, and in my grandparents' house, every door creaked loudly when opened. The figure held something gleaming in her hand, a long, sharp blade. Paralyzed with fear, I could only watch as the figure slowly moved toward me. The room filled with an overwhelming sense of dread, and just as she got closer, I screamed as loudly as I could and squeezed my eyes shut. My aunt burst into the room, turning on the light and asking what was wrong. Too terrified to explain, I jumped out of bed and ran to my grandparents' room to check on Kate. She was there, sound asleep, confirming what I already knew. It hadn't been her. Refusing to stay in that room, I followed my aunt to the kitchen at the other end of the house while she smoked a cigarette. She left me alone briefly to use the bathroom, and I stood there, still shaking. Her dog sat at my feet, and as I bent down to pet it, I suddenly felt a hand on my back. The touch wasn't menacing, it felt reassuring, like someone was trying to comfort me. I turned quickly, but no one was there. To this day, I refuse to sleep in that room. Kate has also experienced strange things in there, hearing noises and seeing unexplainable sights. Whatever was in that room left an impression I'll never forget. When I was about 2 or 3, my family, my parents, my brother, and I, lived in this dodgy old house. I don't remember where it was, but my dad later told me the people who lived there before us were into the occult. Every night, I'd refuse to sleep in my room because I could see people in there. I don't remember much, but my dad says I'd drag my mattress out of my room and perfectly lay it in front of my parents' bedroom door. I couldn't even move a mattress now, let alone at 3 years old. When my dad asked me why I did it, I'd say, "The bad man keeps talking to me." For years after that, nothing happened. It was quiet, until I turned 13. It was during the holidays, and my mum was home. I had just woken up and was lying in bed when I froze. Out of nowhere, I heard someone scream, "Oh God, help me, please help!" Thinking it was my mum, I jumped out of bed and ran to her, but she just looked at me, confused, and said, "No, I'm fine. I didn't hear or say anything." A little shaken, I went back to my room. About half an hour later, I heard a voice again. "Hey, didn't you help me?" That's when the real nightmare began. One night, I had a friend over. We were laughing in the dark when I saw something out of the corner of my eye. Turning to look, I saw what looked like a shadow moving across the wall, except there was no light in the room to cast one. It was darker than the room itself. I asked my friend if she could see it, but she said no. The shadow moved toward the hallway just as my dad walked in to tell us to quiet down. He immediately noticed how cold the room was and told us to move to my bedroom. A month later, I woke up in the middle of the night to find a dark figure standing over me. My room was dimly lit from my stereo, and I could see it clearly. Paralyzed with fear, I screamed and dove under my blankets, refusing to come out until morning. Months passed without incident, and I almost convinced myself it was a nightmare. But then, it happened again. I woke up to see the same dark figure at the end of my bed. This time, there was a little girl in front of him. She wore a white Victorian-style dress and looked sad. I knew instantly she wasn't bad, but the man behind her was. I squeezed my eyes shut, hoping they'd disappear. When my dad and I moved into another house, strange things started happening almost immediately. The first morning there, Dad heard a hello, and thinking it was me, said hello back. Later, when he said goodbye before heading to work, he asked what I was doing up so early. Confused, I told him I hadn't been out of bed. After he left, I heard a hi in a man's voice. Assuming Dad had come back for something, I thought nothing of it. Throughout that year, we saw orbs, objects moved on their own, and later learned that a family who had lived in the house before us had died in a bus accident. We moved again, we move a lot, but this current house, the one we've been in for 3 months now, is the worst. It's an old country house with a creepy vibe, and things have been happening almost every night since we moved in. There's an old man I see walking across my room. He's there, but not fully, like a see-through figure. He has a big bushy beard and looks Amish, glaring at me with a nasty expression every time he passes my bed. Lights turn on by themselves, doors open randomly, and no matter how hot it is outside, the house feels freezing cold. We don't even have a working heater. Objects constantly move. I'll leave my guitar in the lounge, only to find it in the kitchen the next morning. It's not my dad, he treats guitars like gold. And then there's the little girl. I've seen her again, and I don't know why she keeps following me. My dad doesn't notice anything, but I see things all the time. My Nana is the same way. She's been seeing things her whole life. I don't know what to do, how to help these spirits, or how to get rid of them. I'm so tired of being scared out of my mind every night. I live in the rural town of Port Hedland, Western Australia, and this is what happened during a walk 2 Saturdays ago, on the 12th of August. It was around 5:30 in the afternoon, and I was walking alone. Normally, I'd have been walking my dog, Charlie, but she was recovering from an eye infection that left her too tired for exercise. Port Hedland is a coastal town near the northern tip of Australia, known for its heavy rain during cyclone season. The town has an extensive network of ditches to drain the water from the roads. There's also a lot of empty, overgrown land between houses, with weeds so thick that they're rarely burned or trimmed by the council. As I crossed a narrow concrete bridge, I heard heavy breathing coming from the ditch below me. My first thought was that it might be a drunk. Then I remembered a time I was jogging in a park with Charlie, and had come face to face with a feral-looking dog. It had been crouched in the yellow scrub, baring its teeth as I approached. That memory came rushing back. I've learned that we often forget how close we are to nature. I hurried across the bridge and looked under it from a safe distance, but there was nothing there. Feeling a mix of curiosity and caution, I stepped back onto the bridge to figure out where the sound had come from. The breathing resumed. This time, I leaned over the railing, looking directly under the bridge. Again, there was nothing, just some faded beer cans scattered in the ditch. But as I straightened up, I felt stinking, hot breath blow into my ear. Fear. Pure, primal fear gripped me. I turned around, expecting to face whatever was behind me. But there was nothing. Yet the heavy panting continued, and the smell was unmistakable. that rotten flesh stench unique to a dog's carnivorous diet. Before I could react, I felt sudden, invisible pressure on my chest. It didn't feel like paws exactly. I couldn't tell if it was claws, hands, or something else entirely, but I was pinned down. Then came the howling. It erupted in front of me, deafening and vicious. My mind was flooded with the image of that feral dog, the one from my memory. I couldn't think straight. All I could picture was that mongrel, its teeth bared, calculating how close to let me get before it attacked. It felt like this was always supposed to happen, as if I had escaped some cosmic debt and the collector had finally come to claim it. And then, just like that, it was gone. I lay there for what felt like an eternity, too terrified to move. For days, I couldn't stop thinking about the experience. Against all reason, I wanted to go back. It took me 4 days to muster the courage, but I knew I needed to return. On Wednesday, at 5:30 p.m., I stood at the bridge again, exactly as I had the first time. I walked to the center and waited. Nothing happened. As the minutes dragged on, I realized what had drawn the thing to me the first time. It was fear. I closed my eyes and focused on the memory of the dog, the way its lips curled back, exposing its stained, sharp teeth. But as I pictured it, I felt no fear. The memory didn't hold the same power over me anymore. I've thought a lot about what happened that night, and what it could mean. Whatever it was under that bridge, I don't think it was a ghost, at least not in the way we usually think of ghosts. I have no reason to believe it was ever human. I believe it created the breathing sound, offering me the choice to ignore it or confront it. When I returned, it only mimicked what I feared, a dog. Maybe it wanted to help me confront my fears, to exorcise them, in a sense. Or maybe it had its own reasons, feeding off my fears somehow. I don't know. But what I do know is that we often forget how close we are to nature, and maybe, just maybe, there's a part of nature that needs us to be a little closer. I struggle to remember the specifics of this experience. I was young, and over the years, I've tried hard to forget. This took place in Brisbane, Queensland, where my relatives still live in the same house to this day. I was about 10 years old when my auntie, uncle, and their 2 younger sons moved into a beautiful old Queenslander-style home in one of Brisbane's more historic neighborhoods. The house was large, sitting near a big, old school for children with special needs. We later learned that the school had once been a retirement home, long before it became a school. Directly across the road was a newer aged care facility. A few months after they moved in, my family visited. My 2 cousins and I were playing in one of their bedrooms when I left briefly to get a drink. When I returned, I saw my cousin sitting on the floor playing with his toys. Sitting on the bed, watching him, was an old lady, plain as day. She looked about 90 years old, dressed in dated clothes, and had a quiet, gentle demeanor. Nothing about her felt strange at first. I assumed she was someone from the other side of the family, someone I didn't know who had quietly entered the room while I was gone. She didn't interact much, just sat there watching us and occasionally speaking to someone who wasn't in the room. My cousin and I didn't acknowledge her presence to each other. We both seemed to assume the other knew who she was. But as time passed, 15 or 20 minutes, her silence and watchfulness started to creep me out. I decided to say something to her, but when I turned to address her, she was gone. I figured she'd left the room while we weren't looking. It was a big space, and we hadn't been paying much attention. Months later, I hadn't been back to the house, but during a family gathering, my cousin mentioned the lady. He said she often came into his room or the bathroom and asked, "Where's the little blonde girl?" He added that she liked me because I reminded her of herself as a young girl. That struck me as strange. Why would she ask him and not my auntie or uncle where I was? About a year later, I visited the house again. My younger cousin came running up to me and said, "Someone wants to see you." I didn't think much of it until I walked into his room, and there she was again. This time, she looked paler, and the air smelled wrong. A mix of something rotting and musty. I even accused my cousin of causing the smell, but then I realized what was happening. Fear gripped me. I froze against the wall, unable to move or speak. The old lady just smiled at me, a kind but eerie expression, while my cousin obliviously played on the floor. Gathering some courage, I finally asked, "Where do you come from?" She gestured vaguely but didn't point anywhere specific. "Is it the old folks' home across the road?" I asked. She shook her head no. When I turned to look at my cousin and then back at her, she was gone. Confused and shaken, I asked my cousin if he had heard anything she'd said. He looked at me blankly. "What are you talking about?" "She just asked me to call you." That was the last time I saw her. My cousins didn't see her again for years, until one night my cousin was woken up. Half asleep, he heard a woman's voice say, "You kids are all grown up now. You used to wear me out, walking all the way from the home to see you." Startled, he asked his mum about the old lady in his room. My auntie, understandably, flipped out. The family still lives in that house, and nothing strange has happened since. As for me, I've never been back and can't bring myself to talk about it with them. It wasn't until last year, when my cousin brought her up again, that I realized it wasn't all in my head. She was real, or as real as these things can be. She seemed sweet, I suppose, but it still unnerves me that she never really spoke to me directly. I don't know why she was there, but I've never forgotten her. My sister Rose and I were sitting outside one afternoon, watching our kids play hide and seek while chatting, as we often do. Suddenly, something caught my eye, a child. But there was something unusual about her. She seemed to have a faint glow or aura around her. I glanced at Rose and realized she was staring at the same thing. "You see her too, don't you?" I asked, a little unnerved. "Yeah," she replied quietly. The little girl appeared to be playing hide and seek with our kids. She stood by a tree, her hands pressed against it as if she were counting. Just then, my nephew jumped out from behind us, startling us both. When we turned back, the girl was gone. It was unsettling but not frightening. We shrugged it off and went inside with the kids. That night, I decided to stay over at my sister's house. It was too late, and I was too tired to head home with my kids. As we sat talking about what we had seen, my brother-in-law Nathan listened with a skeptical look. "You two must have been seeing things," he said. But Rose and I knew what we saw. Around 11 p.m., Nathan suddenly got up, hearing footsteps. He thought one of the kids was awake. Laughing, Rose and I joked, "It's probably the little girl we saw earlier." But when Nathan checked, all the kids were sound asleep. As he walked back down the hallway, shaking his head, both Rose and I froze. We saw her again. The little girl walked out of the bathroom and into my niece's room. Nathan stopped, visibly shaken, and quickly came back to us. He had never seen anything like it before and was deeply unnerved. In that moment, he believed what we had told him. After a while, we grew used to her presence. She didn't seem to mean any harm, she was just there. For years, we'd occasionally catch glimpses of her, or feel her presence in small ways. Sometimes a cold hand would touch us, leaving goosebumps and even a faint imprint of a little hand. Other times, she would play with our hair. At night, when all the kids were asleep, toys might start going off by themselves. When this happened, we'd calmly say, "It's time for bed now, go on." And the activity would stop. Over the years, we noticed something remarkable. She seemed to grow alongside our children. When we first saw her, she was only slightly bigger than a toddler. Now, she looks about 8 years old. My niece has even seen and spoken to her, chatting as though they were friends. We've come to know her as Cassie, a name that just feels right for her, though none of us can explain how we know it. Even my partner, who doesn't believe in spirits or anything paranormal, has seen her. One night she showed herself to him, and he let out a scream, a grown man, 120 kilograms, absolutely terrified. His heart was pounding, and though he still denies believing in ghosts, he couldn't explain what he saw. Cassie is a beautiful little girl. She has blonde hair, light skin, and wears a long white dress like a nightgown, with no shoes. Her presence has become a natural part of our lives. Despite not knowing where she came from or if she had been with us before we first noticed her, we're certain she means no harm. It's fascinating, and a little eerie, that spirits can seemingly grow, just as we do in life. Cassie has been part of our family for years, and though her origins remain a mystery, we've come to accept and even cherish her quiet presence. She feels like a guardian, a peaceful addition to our lives. This happened not too long ago, around 7 a.m. I live with my dad, and his work hours are usually from 3 a.m. to somewhere between 9 and 11 a.m., which means I'm often alone during that time. Normally, I'd still be asleep, but on this particular morning, I was awake and chatting with a friend on MSN. As the sun began to rise, I started feeling tired and decided to log off and get some rest. I was already in bed since I was using my laptop there, and my cat, Moses, was curled up asleep at the end of my bed, on my feet. I lay down, closed my eyes, and was just beginning to relax when I heard a faint creaking noise coming from the living room. Our house isn't very big, and my bedroom is right next to the living room. My door was slightly ajar to let Moses come and go, so the sound was clear. For some reason, that creaking noise made me uneasy. The house suddenly felt too still, too quiet. I held my breath and listened intently as the noise grew louder, moving closer. It wasn't long before it sounded like it was just outside my bedroom door, then inside my room, right next to my bed. At this point, I felt paralyzed. I couldn't bring myself to move or even look. My bedside drawers began to creak, the kind of sound you'd hear if something heavy was sitting or pressing on them. That drawer had never made a noise like this before. I lay there, frozen, with my back turned toward the drawers. My eyes were shut tight, and I buried my head under the blankets, desperate not to see or hear anything that might confirm my worst fears. Then I felt it. Little depressions on the mattress, like tiny steps, moving behind me. It felt just like when Moses walked on the bed. For a moment, I was relieved, thinking it was just him moving around. But the steps were slow and deliberate, almost too faint to belong to him. My relief turned to terror as I remembered that Moses was still at the foot of the bed. I could feel his weight on my feet. I told myself maybe he moved, and the weight I was feeling was just the heavy blankets, until the steps stopped entirely. Working up some courage, I peeked out from under the covers to check. Moses was still there, fast asleep, completely unmoving. My heart sank. If he hadn't moved, then what had been walking behind me? I quickly ducked back under the blankets, my fear escalating. That's when it happened again, this time much closer. I felt what seemed like a hand pressing gently on the blanket right by my back, as though patting it down. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. I lay as still as possible, hoping whatever it was might leave if it thought I was asleep. I stayed frozen, counting the seconds and wishing desperately for my dad to come home. Then, finally, I heard a car pull into the neighbor's driveway. The headlights shone through my window, and just like that, the sensation stopped. I lay there, still terrified, until I somehow drifted off to sleep. When I woke up later that morning, I told my dad what had happened. He just laughed, dismissing it as my imagination. But I knew what I'd experienced was real. There have been other strange incidents in this house, though none as frightening as that morning. Once, the bathroom tap turned on full blast by itself. Another time, the bathroom mirrors slid open while I was showering. Those events were unnerving, but nothing compared to the terror of feeling someone, so close to me that morning. It's a feeling I'll never forget. My mom and aunt have a history of seeing ghosts, and they've shared plenty of stories about their experiences. A couple of weeks ago, I had my own encounter, and it left me shaken. It happened late one night while my mom and I were watching TV. Out of nowhere, we heard a low growling sound. It sounded like a person. Both of us instantly turned toward the hallway door. Mom, sitting closer to the doorway, said she felt a cold breeze when we heard the noise, which really unsettled her. Since then, she says every time she feels a breeze, she gets shivers down her spine. I was lucky not to be near the door that night. At first, we thought it might be my sister and her boyfriend arguing, but then we heard my sister's door open. Mom and I looked at each other, realizing it wasn't them. From that night on, we've kept the hallway light on to ward off whatever it might have been. A few nights later, I woke up suddenly to the sound of a gasp, as if someone had exhaled sharply right next to my ear. Startled, I opened my eyes and saw a white outline of a figure emerging from my wardrobe. My body immediately felt hot, which was strange since it was 4 a.m. in the middle of winter. I eventually fell back asleep and told my mom and Nan about it the next day. Nan, who doesn't believe in ghosts, brushed it off quickly, saying it was probably nothing. But when I spoke to Mom, she shared even more of the ghostly encounters she and my aunt have experienced over the years. It was oddly comforting to know I wasn't alone in this. 5 nights ago, something else happened. I was trying to fall asleep when I felt a tingling sensation. My Nan says that's just nerves, but it felt different to me. Then, I noticed cold breaths on my neck, and certain spots around me felt unusually freezing. I sleep in complete darkness, but my alarm clock emits a faint light that made it just bright enough to see the outline of a person. Strangely, instead of feeling scared, I felt safe and even happy. I smiled and fell asleep peacefully. 3 nights ago, I felt the same coldness and saw the same outline again. This time, I decided to speak. "I wish I could hear you," I said, thinking it might be the same presence from before. About half an hour later, I heard an attempt at a wolf whistle. That startled me. I hadn't meant my words like that. Suddenly, I felt my body heat up again, and I covered my eyes, trying to convince myself it was just the noise from the cars racing a couple of streets away. Every night, I catch glimpses of white flashes or bright shapes out of the corner of my eye as I try to fall asleep. It's constant, and I can't help but wonder if it's all connected. Part of me worries it's just my imagination or coincidence, but another part of me feels like these experiences are real. I haven't told Mum or Nan about the recent events. Mum gets too scared, and Nan doesn't believe in ghosts at all. This feels like the only place I can share what's happening without being dismissed. Could this really be a ghost, or is it all in my head? I know I'm not crazy, but I just need some reassurance that these experiences are real and not just my imagination running wild. If anything else happens, I'll keep you updated. Last year, I was at my dad's house during the summer. It was a warm, still night, and everything seemed calm. As I was standing in front of the mirror on the back of my door, taking out my hair, a sudden, icy breeze blew under the door. It felt so out of place that I froze for a moment, confused. I shrugged it off and went to bed, but later that night, I woke up suddenly for no apparent reason, completely wide awake. Then, my bedroom door opened, slowly, steadily, until it hit the wall. It wasn't the kind of creak a door makes from a draft. It was deliberate, as though someone had pushed it open. I felt a presence, like someone had entered the room, but I couldn't see anyone. Summoning my courage, I got up and checked if anyone in the house had come to check on me, but everyone was fast asleep. Terrified, I spent the rest of the night in my brother's room. The next morning, I told my dad about what had happened. He casually mentioned that it was known there was a presence in the house. Surprisingly, his response didn't scare me. I actually thought it was kind of cool. Since then, I've come to think of this presence as a friendly, Casper-like ghost. I've had a couple of other encounters with it. Once, it opened the front door wide open, just like my bedroom door. I couldn't see anything, but I smiled and said, "Hey, as if greeting an old friend. Another time, I saw a black figure walk into my dad's room, and I assumed it was the same presence. Sometimes I can feel it standing over my bed, watching me, especially in the dark. While it freaks me out at night, because I instinctively think it's a real person, I've learned to live with it. The presence also likes to make itself known by flicking my bedroom light switch, usually keeping the light off. Earlier this year, I had another strange experience during a Ouija board session with friends. There were about 8 of us, and we set up the board with candles and used a shot glass as the planchette. In hindsight, we probably should have used salt too. We opened the board properly, but it wasn't working well with all of us participating, so we split into smaller groups. While I was in another room with some friends, one of them walked in and said, "They want you to come in." By they, she meant the spirit. Nervous but curious, I went back to the board. My friends told me they had contacted my grandmother. I joined the session and placed my finger on the planchette. When I asked if it was really my grandmother, it quickly moved to yes. I asked where she was, and the board spelled out heaven. At that moment, I couldn't hold back my emotions and started crying. Overwhelmed, I left the room, not realizing at the time that breaking the circle was a mistake. My friends closed the board, though I'm not sure if they did it properly. Afterward, one of the friends who had been part of the session sat beside me and couldn't stop shivering. It was summer, and she wasn't cold. It was like something had affected her. The next day, I brought the board back to my mum's house, and she stored it in the garage. Ever since then, I've felt a presence in the garage, as if someone is watching me whenever I go in. Sometimes, I also get the same feeling in my bedroom. One particular detail stands out. I have a balloon in my room that occasionally moves across the ceiling as if being pulled. It hovers over a doll that my grandmother gave me, though I never placed the balloon there. I've chosen to believe that this is my grandmother's way of letting me know she's watching over me. While I understand that the spirit I contacted during the Ouija board session may not have truly been my grandmother, I hold on to the belief that it was her. It comforts me to think she's still here, looking out for me in her own special way. I'm an 18-year-old guy from the Gold Coast, Australia, and this happened recently at my house. My parents and sister were playing Uno on the couch, while I was in my room watching TV. Suddenly, I heard a huge thud against my bedroom window. At the time, my curtains were drawn, so it took me a moment to gather the courage to move them and check outside. I was a little freaked out, so I decided to sleep on the couch where it felt a little less spooky. I told my parents, but they swore they didn't hear anything. 2 nights later, I was alone at home again. My parents were at a barbecue and my sister was at a sleepover across the road. I was sitting in my room, listening to music and working on some assignments when I looked over at the side door. I saw a tall, dark figure moving across the porch. It was like a faded silhouette of a man, but before I could get a better look, it was gone. That night, around 9:30, I was reading a Simpsons comic in bed when suddenly my sock drawer flew open and spilled everything onto the floor. Then I heard 2 fast knocks on my closet. I got really scared, thinking someone might be in the room, so I ran out, grabbed a knife from the kitchen, and slowly went back into my room. When I opened the closet, I saw that 3 of my shirts were hanging like someone had just knocked them. I didn't sleep that night either. I ended up on the couch again, but still couldn't rest. The next morning, I woke up to find a broken guitar string on my guitar, my pants drawer half open, and both my doorknobs completely twisted off and lying next to each other on the floor. I told my parents, but they just thought I was being weird. Over the next few weeks, before I'd fall asleep, I'd hear my name being whispered around my head. The whispers would start slow, and then get faster before fading away. Then I'd hear my guitar being strummed, and knocks on the window, but this time, they were much louder and more violent. For some reason, the knocks on the closet stopped. A few months later, I had a mate stay over. We set up a blow-up mattress for him on the floor. and we were talking about what we'd do the next day when suddenly the guitar started playing by itself. Then, all my stuffed animals on top of the wardrobe fell off and landed on the floor. We heard knocks on the door, and then half the carpet seemed to lift up by itself, even though there was no fan or breeze. It was terrifying, and my mate and I ended up calling his mom to pick us up late that night. I told my mom the next day, and it seemed like she was starting to believe me. She slept in my room that night while I stayed on the couch. She said nothing unusual happened, but later that night, around 7:30, I woke up because I felt a strong pull on my right toe. I jumped out of bed, terrified, and then my guitar started plucking again. This time, my underwear drawer flew open, but it landed perfectly, not making a mess. These things still happen on and off, and it feels like they're getting worse. I just want to know why these spirits are being so aggressive and why they won't go away. This story took place last year, 2008, starting around mid-February and lasting a few months until we moved house. It wasn't a permanent home, so we were planning to leave anyway, but I was still relieved when we finally did. At the time, I was about 3 months pregnant. The people living in the house with me were my partner, we were both 19, my 14-year-old brother, my 11-year-old sister, my parents, and our family cat. We'd been living there for about 4 months, and aside from occasional odd sensations, like feeling watched, which happens to me often, there hadn't been any signs of paranormal activity. My relationship with my partner was also strained, especially with the baby on the way, so we didn't always go to bed at the same time. He would often stay up late, talking online, while I would go to sleep early. One night, just after I turned off the light, I did my usual thing of letting my eyes wander around the room to help me fall asleep. But this time, my gaze was drawn to the center of the room, about 2 feet from where I lay. I saw, or thought I saw, what looked like a darker patch of air, almost like it was thicker than the rest of the room. My curiosity got the better of me, so I stared at it more closely. That's when I realized it had a humanoid shape. I was suddenly overwhelmed with fear and quickly reached for the lamp to turn it on. The figure was gone, but I still felt uneasy and wasn't sure if I had actually seen something or if I had just dozed off too quickly. I went to my partner to tell him what happened. He's a bit of a skeptic, but he was kind enough to listen. He comforted me and let me curl up next to him until I fell asleep. After that, I didn't think too much about it, but I did prefer sleeping with the lights on, as I felt safer that way. A month later, my partner mentioned that a couple we were friends with, let's call them Jenny and Bob, had stayed over at our place for the weekend. Jenny had told Bob that she woke up one night to see a dark hooded figure in the middle of the room. It had frightened her, but she rolled over and went back to sleep. My partner didn't tell Jenny or Bob about my experience beforehand, so it was strange that Jenny had seen something similar. Around that time, I started to notice the same dark, thick patch in the middle of my room whenever I decided to turn off the light and try to sleep without it. I hadn't experienced anything like this before, and I was especially unsettled because I was pregnant. The figure started appearing just as I was entering my 3rd month of pregnancy, which is when I considered my baby was officially a fetus. This connection between the figure and my pregnancy made me even more anxious. My partner and I saw the figure many times after that. It always stood still in the middle of the room, and each time, we both felt a mix of unease and intense fear. However, the figure was only visible at night, and there were no strange experiences during the day. I can't recall any other typical paranormal signs, like cold spots or strange noises, but I also know that pregnancy can bring on all sorts of emotions and sensations, so I tried not to jump to conclusions. Jenny wasn't pregnant at the time, but there were some strange things that happened with Bob while they were staying with us. He wet the bed a couple of times, though he denied it. At 19, who wouldn't try to cover it up? But you can't fake wetting the bed, so it just added to the overall weirdness of the situation. A few weeks ago, I went camping in the bush for a few days with two old mates. It was my first break in months, as I work as a roadie for international bands like Pink and Nickelback. We decided to head out to a remote spot in Kyogle, northern NSW, near Mount Lindsay, which is known locally as Yowie Country. For those who don't know, a Yowie is the Australian equivalent of Bigfoot, a mysterious creature in Aboriginal folklore, much like the bunyip. We had heard about a spot off the beaten path, a disused logging trail that hardly anyone goes near, which was perfect for us. After driving for hours, we finally found the old road that led to the campsite. We parked the truck 5 miles away and set off on foot, navigating through dense forest, avoiding snakes and jumping ants. Those little buggers like to bite your privates if you're not careful, until we arrived at our site. Setting up camp was easy, as we were all experienced bushmen. We threw a tarpaulin over some branches to protect us from the rain, though we were in a drought, but old habits die hard. We buried our beer and food in a pit to keep them cool and set up a solid fire pit. With wood and twigs gathered, we were ready for a night of card games, beer, and the usual banter about our past adventures. It was a warm, clear night with no moon, but the stars seemed to be watching us from above. Around the time I needed to take a piss, I grabbed the torch and wandered into the bush, with my mates calling out some joke about the boogeyman. I wasn't too worried about that, more concerned about the deadly snakes than any boogeyman. But as I stood there, taking care of business and staring up at the stars, a horrible, rotten smell hit me. It was like something had died nearby, and it was so bad it made my eyes water. I stumbled back to camp, gagging, but just as I was getting close, I heard a deep, rumbling growl. It sounded like an empty stomach growling, but way louder. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I quickly hurried back to the campsite and told the others, but they just brushed it off, saying it was probably just an animal. So, we went back to our card game. By 11:45, I was exhausted. I rolled out my sleeping bag, said goodnight to the others, and crawled in. I don't know how long I was asleep, but suddenly we were all jolted awake by the most terrifying, blood-curdling scream I've ever heard. It wasn't human, it was something inhuman. We sat up, staring at each other in disbelief, then heard something crashing through the forest, coming straight toward us. It sounded like a bulldozer smashing through the bush. Whatever it was big. Then I saw it. Something massive, well-built, and moving fast through the trees. It was hard to make out the details in the dark, but it looked like a huge, hairy human or maybe a gorilla. The smell was unbearable, a rotten, corpse-like stench that I'll never forget. The creature was over 7 feet tall, and as it charged through our campsite, it vanished into the night. We were all in shock, stumbling over our words, trying to figure out what the hell we just saw. Was it some hippie on a bad trip? No way. It was too big and muscular for that. But the smell, it was like something out of a nightmare. None of us slept that night. I grabbed my hatchet. One of my mates found a large branch, and the other, well, I'm not sure what he had. We sat there, terrified, waiting until dawn before we finally left. When the sun came up, what we saw around the campsite made our blood run cold. The small saplings were bent and snapped, our gear was trampled beyond recognition, and the ground was churned up like something huge had been stomping through it. We were shaken to our core. We didn't tell the locals about what happened. We didn't want them thinking we were crazy. But a few weeks later, I found out that someone else had the same experience a few miles from where we camped. Whatever it wasn't just a one-off. I'm turning 18 this year, but please don't dismiss my experience just because of my age. I'm feeling pretty nervous writing about this, with music on and the blinds and light on, right in the middle of the day. A little background: I'm a mature person and I don't jump to conclusions yelling, "It's a ghost!" at every little thing. I guess you could call me skeptical. What I'm about to share happened in 2008, when I was 16, and it still gives me chills to this day. Imagine being a mother and having your 5-year-old daughter ask, "Mummy, why do you stand on the second rung of my bunk bed ladder and watch me at night?" When you don't. I vaguely remember seeing things like this when I was younger. As a child, I often saw a solid black figure of my mother, standing at the end of my bunk bed or beside it near my head. It was so real to me, and since I assumed it was my mum, I'd always go back to sleep. I was never scared. I was often sick as a child, and even now I'm still not in great health. I hadn't seen that figure of my mum in years, though, until April 2008, a week after returning from a trip to Thailand. It was a Saturday morning, probably around the 12th of April, when it happened. I had a strange dream that night. It wasn't a nightmare, but I felt uneasy. In the dream, there was this evil, fat man who wanted to take me as a prisoner. I escaped, but he sent people after me to get me back. It wasn't a nightmare though. I've never had nightmares. I don't get scared easily. I woke up thinking, that was weird. I was in that half-asleep state, when you're not really awake but not asleep either. The blinds were closed, but there was some light in the room. I could hear my mum moving around in the house. I looked down at my armchair, lying on my side, blanket bunched to my right, pillow under my left arm. At the end of my bed, near the wall, there was the solid black figure of a young man, probably in his early 20s, sitting on the arm of the chair, facing the door. He was slouched, like he'd been sitting there for a while, and when I looked at him, he sat up. The first thing I noticed was how long his neck was. It creeped me out. I remember thinking, who the hell are you? I was half-dazed, still thinking this was part of my dream. He replied, in a calm, almost attractive voice. "It's okay. Underscore 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 sent me to guard/watch/look after you." He said a name, but it didn't make sense to me, and I couldn't remember it. My mind went straight to the thought that this guy was sent by the evil fat man from my dream to come and get me. I thought, this is all part of the dream. I just rolled my head back and forth on the pillow, squinting my eyes shut, trying to convince myself this was stupid. But he kept talking, trying to say something important. After a while, he stopped and just sat there, watching me. I even heard him sigh in light frustration. At some point, I must have fallen asleep, because when I woke up I thought, that's funny. I was lying exactly the same as before, blanket on my right, pillow under my left arm, the room exactly as it was. I got up, shrugged it off, and went to ask my mom, "Did you hear me talking to anyone just now?" She said no, but I didn't think much of it at the time. Later, the realization hit me. I had been awake. Something was definitely there. I wasn't scared at all, though. In fact, I had been pretty rude to him. I still don't know who it was. My mum suggested it might have been my granddad, so we tried looking for old pictures of him when he was young. But the guy I saw was much thinner, not skinny, just more slender. Mum still laughs about the fact he was an attractive young man. She knows I'm not lying, and I hope you believe me too. I don't think he was a demon. My best friend is Christian, and when I told her about it, she got me even more freaked out. I also talked to some teachers at my Christian school, but they weren't much help. They got married in August, and they both passed away in August, 10 years apart, from the same illness. There is no bridge in this world or the next that can stop a soulmate from crossing it. The last time I saw my dad alive was just before he died. With all his strength, he raised his hand to my mum's face, looked her in the eyes, and said 3 final words. "I love you." This is my story. After all the paranormal experiences I'd had in my life, at the age of 30, for some reason, I went into denial. I convinced myself that everything I had experienced was just my imagination. I told myself that death was final and declared myself an atheist. I lived with this belief for about 4 years, accepting that this life was all there was. That was until I lost my dad to lung cancer in August 1999. My dad never had strong opinions about religion or the afterlife. He was the kind of man who, if it meant showing my mum he was still around, would have climbed empty Everest to get a message through. He would have done anything to let her know he was okay. When I lost him, I grieved, but I didn't look for signs or try to prove that he was still around. I just took comfort in the fact that he wasn't suffering anymore. My mum, though, took it much harder. They were married in August 1958, when she was just 17. From that day on, he was her whole world. One night, as I lay in bed contemplating my old beliefs, I decided to try a method I had used when I was younger to enhance my psychic abilities. I had experienced premonitions that saved my life and had been visited by spirit guides over the years. I believe that, present time, is when our spirit controls our thoughts, and that in dreams, we can communicate with the beyond. So, I meditated myself into a deep sleep, focusing on the back of my hands, a part of the body we usually never see when dreaming. Then, my dad appeared. I believe now that I crossed over into the spirit world. I consciously tricked my subconscious mind, and suddenly, everything around me became clear, like I was awake, but in a dreamlike state. The first thing he said was, "You did it, son," and we embraced. He told me to tell Mum. I love her. We spoke for a while, and then I asked him, "Dad, how can I prove this dream is real?" Remember, just 10 minutes earlier, I had been an atheist. He paused and said, "Just mention Harry and Edna." Then, a bright light appeared to my right, and I knew it was time to go. The next morning, I told Mum about the dream. She looked at me, surprised, and confirmed that she knew Harry and Edna. They had been temporary carers for Dad when he was 14. After that dream, things started happening. A few weeks after Dad passed, I was in my room, almost asleep, when I suddenly felt someone sit down on the bed. The bed sank, and then after a while, it rose again. I tried to dismiss it as a twitch in my leg, but deep down, I knew something paranormal was going on. Most nights, just as I was about to fall asleep, I'd feel a sudden jolt. The walls would creak loudly, sometimes in repetitive bursts that would last all night. Shadows moved up and down the hallway. My youngest son began seeing things too, including ghosts, and he was so scared that my wife often slept with him. One night my bedroom door, which had a towel and a jumper on it, slowly opened by itself. All the windows were closed, and I'd lived in that house for 17 years. This had never happened before. The next day, I put a fan in front of the door and turned it on full speed. The door didn't move. That night, as I lay in bed, the walls started banging again, so I said, "Dad, if that's you, could you bang 3 times and then stop?" Sure enough, the walls banged 3 times, and then everything went quiet. From that moment on, the banging continued as a way for me to communicate with him. Over the years, including just before Mum died, he visited to let me know when something was about to happen. The walls banged right before my cousin, uncle, and niece died. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened when Mum was in palliative care. 3 days before she passed, the walls began banging again. She had terminal lung cancer, and I knew she was nearing the end. In 2007, while I was asleep, a spirit guide came to me in a dream and told me, "Your mum is sick." After Dad died, Mum had lived with a broken heart. For 10 years, she never sought to rebuild her life. I had begged her to see a doctor, but she refused. I told the family about the dream and made a chilling prediction: Mum wouldn't be with us in 2 years. I still carry guilt for not trying harder, but I realized that Mum was dying from a broken heart. She was waiting for her soulmate to return. In January 2009, while I was sleeping, my spirit guide returned. He told me bluntly, "Your mother is going to suffer." The next day, I took Mum to the doctor, and she told me about a dream she had the same night. A little dark figure had told her that she'd be better off in the spirit world. That night marked the beginning of her battle with cancer. For the next 7 months, it was too painful to describe. But what I will tell you is this: Mum kept her dignity and never let the illness break her spirit. Even in the face of all that pain, she never lost her sense of humor. One day, with a cheeky grin, she told me, "I'm going to haunt you, God love her." 3 days before she passed, the walls started banging again. I knew Dad was coming to take her. On the day she died, just moments before, I held her hand and whispered, "Go to him, Mom. Your heart will fill with joy. Your soulmate has returned, and your kingdom awaits." Mom passed away moments later, on a Thursday in August 2009. The cancer broke down her body, but it never broke her spirit. 7 days passed, and there were no knocks on the wall. Lying in bed crying, I felt so alone. Losing my mum hurt like nothing else. But then, suddenly, the walls began banging again, louder than ever, throughout the entire house. Knock after knock. I knew it was Mum and Dad. My wife, who was in another room, came to me, asking what was happening. She could see it in my face. She knew. Later that night, I felt Mum sit on my bed. I felt her hand touch my face, a touch that a child never forgets. I knew it was her. I said, "Mom, I know it's you. Please don't let my energy keep you here. You've suffered enough. Go now, where the days are like minutes, and the nights are like seconds." Though I couldn't see or hear her, I could feel her love as she waved goodbye. Since then, they haven't been back. May their souls entwine in eternal bliss. It was a fine spring morning in 2004. My daughter and I had packed the car and were heading south for a 2-hour drive from Sydney. She was representing our district in the under-15 state basketball championships, and we were both excited. The music was playing, and we were singing along, enjoying the trip as we cruised down the freeway. Mischievously, my daughter switched on her phone camera and started recording while I drove. We were in high spirits, excited about the games ahead and the town we were headed to. I won't mention the specific road we were on, but it was notorious for accidents. As we rounded a bend, traffic suddenly came to a halt. Only a minute earlier, 2 cars had collided head-on, and the scene was disturbing. I told my daughter to stay in the car while I went to check if I could help. As I walked toward the accident, I saw a person lying in the middle of the road, about 30 feet away. Instantly, I sensed this person was in serious trouble. One of the other drivers was out of her car, screaming hysterically. The person lying on the road was a young woman. When I got closer, I could see that she was badly injured. Her leg was broken, her neck seemed wrong, and she had a large, deep gash just above her left eye. It wasn't bleeding, which made me think she might already be dead. I'm not a doctor, but I have basic first aid training, and instinct told me I should at least check for a pulse. I knelt down beside her, the road covered in metal debris, the smell of oil and fuel strong in the air. The stain and odor from it lasted on my jeans, which I mention because it becomes relevant later. I gently placed my fingers on her neck to feel for a pulse, but the moment I touched her, I realized her neck was severely broken and there was no pulse. This young woman was dead. She had been thrown from the car, not wearing a seatbelt, and the impact had killed her instantly. As I walked back to my car, all I could think about was her parents, and how devastated they would soon be. After hugging my daughter, I started to feel an overwhelming sense of guilt. Could I have done more? This thought stayed with me as we made our way to the basketball event. There, we were both taken aside and counseled. I spoke with an ambulance officer who reassured me that there was nothing more I could have done. He called his colleagues who had worked on her and found out that, officially, she had been declared dead on arrival at the hospital. However, CPR had been performed as a standard procedure due to her age, 18, hoping for a miracle. Later that night, still thinking about her parents, I wondered if they knew the truth. As a parent myself, I would have been torturing myself wondering if she suffered or what she was thinking in her final moments. I decided to call the Crash Investigation Unit and ask them to pass a message to her parents. I was there in the first minute of the accident, and your daughter did not suffer. The people who were with her were dignified in the circumstances, and I offer my heart and condolences to your family. 2 weeks later, I had an experience that I'll never forget. I was sitting in my room, ironically wearing the same jeans from that day, when I sensed a presence. Since my father passed away, I'd been more sensitive to spirits, and they had been visiting me more often. At first, I was frightened and didn't know how to handle these unexpected visits. I went through phases of being scared, praying for them to leave, even throwing pillows and swearing at them to stay away. One night, I woke up to see an apparition of a man standing in my room, staring at me. I didn't know who he was, but I was tired of being scared, so I decided to walk straight through him. Not a great idea. As I passed through him, I felt a chill that reminded me of another story I haven't shared yet. From that night on, I began to understand that most spirits are just lost or confused, trying to connect or send a message from a world they once knew. A few days later, I saw something that would forever change how I view these visits. About 4 feet in front of me, a color began to form in the air. It looked like a dress, a purple-blue color, almost like something worn on a special occasion, a prom dress. I later described it to my wife. I didn't see her face or her body, but I knew immediately it was the young woman from the car accident. I don't know why she was there or why she had come to me. I'm not able to communicate with spirits in the way some others can, but I didn't feel scared. Instead, I felt deep sadness. She seemed lost, so the only thing I could think to do was tell her to go into the light. I said this a few times, praying that she would move on. After about 30 seconds, the dress disappeared, and so did she. The experience stayed with me, and I felt connected to her in a way I can't explain. But it made me think about the time when I was 18 and involved in a serious car accident myself. I was in the front passenger seat, and my cousin was driving. We were both unbuckled. The car lost control and crashed head-on into a solid tree at about 45 miles per hour. Just before impact, something extraordinary happened. A white flash of light surrounded the car, and everything went into slow motion. What would have been just a split second felt like 5 long seconds, giving me enough time to brace for impact. I should have been thrown out of the car, or at the very least, seriously injured. But when the crash happened, I walked away with only a couple of minor injuries and didn't even need to go to the hospital. To this day, I believe something higher intervened that night. A force greater than myself saved my life, and I am forever grateful. In contrast, this young woman lost her life because she wasn't wearing a seatbelt. Her death might have been prevented if she had. I carry that reminder with me, not only for myself but also in honor of her, as a reminder to always buckle up. We adopted poem from the SPCA, a sweet calico tortoiseshell girl with a gentle nature and soft meows. Friendly and motherly, she would lick the face of any cat that came near her, knowing how to be a queen without acting strong. All the cats respected her, and she treated us humans the same, never choosing a favorite, curling up on anyone's lap as we watched TV. A couple of years later, White Sox came into our lives, a hungry tuxedo stray looking for a place to belong. He didn't mind not being the alpha male and didn't fight Tom for that position. He was loving and easygoing, often twitching his tail like a rattlesnake. White Sox became especially attached to my son, moving into his room and even learning to climb the ladder to his loft bed where he slept every night. Over the years, we adopted other cats. Tom passed away, and we took in Skittle from friends who had lost their house in a fire. Poem and White Sox accepted her, but Skittle became White Sox's playmate, and often his bully, as she had grown up playing rough with a puppy. We moved to a new house that came with a cat named Mishifu, a solid black girl who chose to stay with us after her previous owners moved. Poem and White Sox accepted her, but Skittle and Mishifu never got along, even after 6 years. As my kitties grew older, they began sleeping more, losing weight, and slowing down. White Sox protested Skittle's rough play, and Poem needed dental surgery, leaving her with bad breath. Despite their age, they remained relatively healthy, though we realized our time with them was limited. In April 2021, White Sox stopped eating, lost more weight, and seemed always cold. We knew it was time to say goodbye. I informed my family, but my son asked to wait until he could see White Sox one last time. We made the appointment for the next day. On April 20th, 2021, we all met at the vet's office, where only one of us was allowed to be with White Sox during his final moments due to COVID restrictions. My son held him as he passed, while my daughter and I waited in the parking lot, crying together. Afterwards, my son came out holding a small box with White Sox body. We hugged and cried, knowing after 17 years, our beloved cat was gone. My kids left for Vancouver, and I drove home with White Sox body beside me, thanking him for the love he gave us. I buried him in the yard near our house, planting an iris on his grave. A month later, I had a dream where my children were still little, and we were in our old house. We went to the deck, and instead of the familiar driveway, there was a tropical forest with dozens of cats of all colors. Then I saw Tom, and soon after, White Sox came running and jumped onto Tom's back. They made eye contact with me, showing me that after crossing Rainbow Bridge, White Sox had finally become friends with Tom. I woke up happy, knowing my cats were together in a beautiful place. In November 2021, we adopted another tuxedo cat named Ella, a sweet adult female who quickly attached to my son. One night, he felt and heard a cat purring beside him, but when he opened his eyes, Ella was asleep on the windowsill. Another time, Ella followed something invisible with her eyes, and a book fell off the wall for no apparent reason. In May 2022, Poem began losing weight and became disoriented, meowing loudly in the basement as if she couldn't find her way around the house. A few times she woke up shaking, once even falling into the water bowl and off the stairs. I knew it was time to let her go before she suffered more. I called the vet, and on June 22, 2022, we said goodbye. After Poem passed, I buried her next to White Sox, just 4 months before the 23rd anniversary of her adoption. I asked her to let me know when she was with her siblings. Since then, I've dreamed of her, always healthy and happy. In one dream, I was afraid to touch her, knowing she had passed, but I could feel her soft fur. One day, while napping, I heard Poem's familiar soft purring end with a whistling sound. I woke up, even catching a whiff of her bad breath. I'm not sure if it was just a dream, but it was comforting to feel her presence again. I hope that Skittle, Ella, Mishifu, and Monkey are all getting along, even if I'm not there to see it. My grandmother passed away from heart failure in 1984, 26 years ago. She was an incredible woman, with a massive heart and an unbelievably loving nature. She had 14 of her own children, and, at the age of 50, raised another child from birth due to the tragic circumstances of the child's parents. One night in 1982, after a night out, I came home to find my grandmother in the guest room, struggling with chest pains and difficulty breathing. The last thing she wanted was to wake my dad, who had an early start for work the next day, a typical gesture of my grandmother's selflessness. Back in 1972, she had suffered a heart attack and, incredibly, was revived after dying twice on the surgeon's table. 10 years later, things were looking grim again. After some time in the hospital, the doctors informed us that her chances of survival were not good. But my grandmother was a fighter, and with the support of family prayers and love, she hung on. Later that night, as I lay in bed, I felt I would have a premonition or a sense of what would happen to her. That night, I had a lucid dream. I remember flying through an open field about 15 feet off the ground. It was vivid, and I was consciously aware of seeking answers. I wanted to connect with my spirit guide, so I focused on the back of my hands to elevate my consciousness. The dream shifted, and I found myself standing in the field. It felt real, so real that I could smell the air and feel the ground beneath my feet. I call this reality projection, a phenomenon I believe spirits might use to create such vivid experiences. It's also, in my view, something that might keep some souls stuck, unable to move on. I began shouting, "Where are you? Over and over, the sky dark and stormy, with black clouds swirling fast. The wind howled, and rain threatened to pour down. I knew my time in this state of consciousness was limited, but I was desperate for answers. I pushed the boundaries, demanding an answer. Finally, the clouds parted, and the sun emerged. Out of nowhere, my spirit guide appeared before me. He has been with me for as long as I can remember, though I can't say exactly when he first came into my life. He predicted my mother's fate 2 years before her passing, warned me of her lung cancer before she was diagnosed, and even foretold my own death. He told me that I would live to be 77 years old. I have a feeling it will be in August. Our conversation was short and direct, as it always is. He told me that my grandmother would survive this time, but the next time, they would take her. I woke up feeling a sense of relief, knowing she would pull through. I couldn't wait to share the news with my family. However, in 1984, 2 years later, I was living with my girlfriend on the Central Coast when I got the call. It was my dad, and he informed me that my grandmother had passed away from complications with her heart. Her death hit me hard. She was the first family member I was close to who passed away. As I lay in bed that night, I remembered a conversation I had with her before she passed. We talked about life and death, and she promised me she'd come back to let me know she was okay. That night, after the funeral, something strange happened. I was lying in bed when I heard a siren noise coming from a locked cupboard in the room. The sound was loud and piercing. My girlfriend's parents arrived, confused about the noise coming from a cupboard that had been sealed for years. After they found the key and opened the cupboard, we discovered an old toy inside that had been turned on, something that hadn't been touched in years. I remembered a Christmas from my childhood when we were too poor to afford presents, but my grandmother still managed to bring gifts. On Christmas Eve, I saw her hop off the bus, carrying 2 bags full of presents for us. Despite all we lacked, she made sure her grandchildren didn't go without. I'll never forget that night before she left us. I was a young man, alone and crying with the heart of a fragile boy, but my grandmother always comforted me. That night, she gave me one final present, this toy from the cupboard. My girlfriend worked at a gym in Melbourne, Australia, for about 6 months before anything unusual happened. The gym, located in a former hospital and psych ward from the 1800s to early 1900s, had undergone renovations to expand. And that's when strange things started to occur. The gym had an underground area that had once been part of the hospital. It was an abandoned space, full of empty rooms and hallways, and it wasn't used by the gym. My girlfriend worked in the manager/sales team, which meant she and the other staff often stayed late, sometimes after 9 p.m. They all knew about the building's history, and even the builders working on the renovation were aware of it. Occasionally, my girlfriend and her colleagues would venture into the abandoned areas, but they couldn't go far. After passing the first few rooms, they started feeling uneasy and sick, as my girlfriend described it. They would always turn back, too frightened to go any further. I remember my girlfriend telling me these stories, and I thought it was just because of the building's history as a psych ward. I would laugh it off and say, "You're probably just scared because you know it's a psych ward." But things started getting stranger. The builders began asking the staff if they had taken any of their tools, as tools would keep going missing. This happened often, with tools vanishing overnight, and it became a running mystery between the builders and the staff. I thought maybe the builders were just playing tricks on the staff, knowing the history of the place. But then, things took a much darker turn, and I'm still getting chills thinking about it. One morning, around 7 a.m., my girlfriend called me in tears. She was struggling to speak through her sniffles and sobs, so I asked, "Do you need me to come pick you up?" She said yes, and I rushed to the gym, worried something had happened. Maybe she'd been fired or something worse. When I arrived, I went straight into the reception area, but there was no one around. No staff, no gym members, just an empty building. I started freaking out. I walked into the gym calling her name, and finally saw her boss, who was also her friend. She told me they had closed the gym for the day and that the staff had been sent home. I found that odd. This was one of the biggest gyms in Melbourne, and they wouldn't close for something minor. I asked her what had happened, and her response made my blood run cold. "I think it's best that we leave right now. I have to close the gym." The way she said it made it sound like something was seriously wrong. I immediately called my girlfriend, and when she picked up, I told her I was inside the gym. She freaked out and told me to come outside, right now. I ran outside and saw her standing about 3 stores down, on the corner of the block. When she saw me, she hugged me and started crying again. I asked her what was going on, and she promised to explain in the car. Once we were in the car, she finally calmed down a bit and told me the unthinkable. "There are ghosts in there." I laughed at first, thinking she was joking, but she just looked at me with serious eyes and said, "No, really, there are ghosts in there." I wasn't a strong believer in ghosts at the time, but something about the way she said it made me feel uneasy. As she continued, she explained what had happened. She had arrived early for work, and she and her boss were the only ones there, besides the builders. One of the builders came upstairs and asked if they had access to the security footage. His tools, a bucket, had been moved to one of the rooms downstairs, out of sight of the cameras, even though the bucket had been placed in full view of the CCTV. They went into the security office to review the footage. What they saw shocked them. The bucket, in full view of the camera, moved on its own. It was pushed several meters away from its original spot, out of the camera's view. The builder panicked, gathered the other workers, and told them to pack up and leave. They all left in a hurry, clearly shaken by what had happened. I believed my girlfriend, but I wanted to see the proof for myself. She didn't go back to the gym for another 2 weeks, and as far as I know, the renovations were never finished during the time she worked there. The oddest part is that the CCTV footage was reportedly taken by some people who worked for the government. As far as I know, what happened at that gym never got out to anyone except the people who were there. I'm not sure what exactly I'm dealing with, but the things happening in my house are starting to scare me. For the past few years, I've been experiencing some strange and intense supernatural events, and it's become impossible to ignore. I don't know if it's a poltergeist or something else, but I'll start from the beginning. It all began with the doors opening by themselves. At first, I thought it was the wind causing a vacuum to pull them open, especially since the wind would sometimes gush past the windows. But recently, I heard my mom's bedroom door open by itself, and I knew something wasn't right. The door has an old handle that makes a grinding noise when it turns, so when I walked down the hall, I found it wide open. I had just passed it minutes before, and it was closed. My sister and I were the only ones at home, and she heard it too when we were both sitting in the lounge. Then I started seeing my bedroom door swing open, sometimes violently, especially as I was about to walk into my room. It only became more concerning when I realized this still happened even if I'd made sure all the windows and doors in the house were closed. As I'm writing this, I can actually see the front door to the house moving, swinging back and forth about 2 feet each way. It only moves when I'm looking at it, and it's been happening for a while now. Earlier tonight, our cat Ringo was let inside. He's usually calm and friendly, and he always sits beside me on the lounge when he's inside. But tonight, when I let him in, he wouldn't move past the front door. I didn't think much of it at first, but when I went into the kitchen, he ran past me like something was chasing him. He bolted straight into the corner of the sunroom, clearly distressed, ears down, eyes wide. I picked him up, but as soon as I opened the front door, he jumped out of my arms. I've also seen moving shadows, especially near my bedroom door at night. One time, I was lying on my bed reading, and I looked up and saw a shadow pass by the door. There was no one in the house, and none of the pets were around either. More recently, I saw a full silhouette of a man standing at the end of my bed. It was strange because the shadow seemed to move, almost like it was alive. There's also the strange sound of scratching, like nails running down a blackboard. The walls in our house are gypsum board, which has a similar texture to a chalkboard, and the noise really creeped me out. Items also go missing all the time. If I leave something on my desk, it usually ends up somewhere else, often in odd places, like behind furniture. My sister's stuff does the same thing. For example, she left her Tamagotchi on her dressing table once, and when she woke up, it was gone. She never found it. One time, my mom bought groceries, things like tomatoes, cheese, and tomato sauce, and left them on the kitchen floor while she went to lie down. Later, when I came home, neither my sister nor I knew where the groceries went. My mom asked me where I'd put them, and I had no idea. After looking for a while, she gave up, but 2 weeks later, she found the groceries rotting behind a blanket box in her room. Neither of us can figure out how they got there. I often feel like something is watching me, especially when I'm home alone. Once, around 2:30 a.m., I felt a hand grab my arm. It didn't feel like a normal touch, more like the hand passed through me. I've also heard deep breathing next to me while I try to sleep. It's a sound that happens regularly. More recently, my sister told me she's had the same experience, with something grasping her wrist and even slapping her once. I also sometimes feel something touch my neck, or my foot and wrist will feel like they're being grabbed. I've heard sounds that seem like something heavy being dragged across the floor of my room at night. The sound goes on for half an hour or more. One time, a piece of paper with a paperweight on it slid across the floor of my room while I was walking back in. It was on my desk before, and there was no explanation for how it moved. At night, I've heard what sounds like a group of people running down the hall. I've gone out of my room to check, and there's no one there, and the lights are still off. Things got worse when a close family member passed away nearly a year ago. I thought maybe some of the strange occurrences were related to that person's spirit, but then my sister told me that this had been happening to her for over a year before our family member passed away. She's had banging noises against the windows and walls, especially when she's alone. Just the other day, she was getting a glass of water, and when she left the kitchen, we heard loud thumping on the sunroom windows. The room is elevated, so no one could be outside doing this. It wasn't windy, and the noise was definitely something hitting the windows. It felt like someone was doing it, not something natural like branches. There's also been a table in the sunroom that shook about a year ago. When I called my dad to come and see it, he dismissed it, saying it was just the floor shaking from people walking around. But it looked like someone was physically shaking it. Sometimes when I sit down, it feels like the chair or the lounge I'm sitting on is being shaken. One night, while I was washing dishes, a brush from a dustpan and brush set was thrown at me from nowhere. It didn't hit me, but it struck the side of the sink with a loud bang. I didn't react right away, but I couldn't stop thinking about how hard it had been thrown. The same thing happened with a muffin tin while I was peeling potatoes. It felt like something was touching my hair, and when I turned around, the muffin tin had been thrown back to where I'd originally placed it. I was the only one in the kitchen at the time. After that, I noticed that the door to my room, which had been closed when I left, was open and the light was on when I came back. I've also had a strange experience in the kitchen in the middle of the night. I woke up, went to get a glass of milk, and found that all 4 elements on the stove were turned on. I had checked them earlier, and no one had been in the kitchen since. This has happened several times since then. One time, I was in the lounge room when I heard a loud crack, and the smoke alarm went off. I saw the kitchen walls glowing red and found a small fire on the stove. I had left a plate with bacon fat on it, and even though I had turned the stove off, the element had somehow turned itself back on. I know I had checked the stove before I left. There are also occasional loud banging noises, like someone pounding on door frames or walls, and sometimes it sounds like metal objects clashing together. A few times I've even heard what sounds like growling outside my bedroom door, sometimes next to me. One of the strangest things happened recently when I woke up around 3 a.m. I stepped out of my room and saw a pair of glowing white eyes just outside the door. I was more shocked than scared, but the eyes stayed there, staring at me for about 6 seconds before fading away. They turned pale blue and lowered before disappearing. I don't know what's going on. I've tried to explain these events, but there's no logical explanation. The only thing I can think of is that the house has a dark history. The previous tenants had some very negative people living here, and we learned that a woman who lived here before us became very depressed and eventually committed suicide under the house. I found some of her writings, and it seemed like she was in a dark, sad place. Since we moved in, I've noticed strange things happening, but recently it's become unbearable. These events started right after we moved in, and it seems like they've gotten worse over time. I'm just not sure what I'm dealing with or how to handle it. This happened about 6 months ago, when my 13-year-old sister, Heather, and 3 of her friends, Jana, Chloe, and Shannon, spent the night at our house. They decided it would be fun to try a Ouija board. I've always had an interest in the paranormal, but it scares me too. I've always stuck to my rule. Never touch a Ouija board, they're nothing but trouble. But my sister begged me, saying that the 4 of them weren't generating enough energy for it to work. I reluctantly agreed, but only after spending about an hour researching how to protect ourselves from bad spirits. We set up in Heather's bedroom, lighting several white tea lights around the room, and chose a glass to use. Both Heather and I are Catholic, but we're not regular churchgoers, just school masses. We all sat around the board, 5 of us with our fingers on the glass. It only occurred to me now, while writing this, that when we sat down, we probably looked like an out-of-shape pentagram. I don't know if that makes a difference, but it feels odd to think about now. At first, things were quiet. Then, after a few questions, the glass started moving, but it eventually stopped. We waited for a while, trying to get it to move again, but it wouldn't. Finally, we said, "Goodbye." Then, just as we were about to call it quits, the glass suddenly moved toward the edge of the board. If you know anything about Ouija boards, you know that sometimes spirits can escape if the session isn't closed properly. After the glass moved, Chloe freaked out and pulled her hand off the glass. I was about to do the same, but then the glass tipped up, nearly falling over. I quickly placed my fingers on it and moved it to "Goodbye" before flipping the board over. That's when I looked up at Heather. She was staring at me, frozen, not blinking or moving at all. Chloe nudged her, but Heather still didn't respond. I asked, "Are you okay?" and told her to "Stop it, this isn't funny." But she didn't react. After about 20 to 30 seconds, Heather suddenly gasped, and her hands flew to her throat, as if she was choking herself. She gasped for air for a few seconds before finally calming down. When she did, she asked, "What happened?" I still thought she was joking, so I said, "Oh, as if you don't know." But she looked genuinely confused and said, "No, I seriously have no idea. What the hell happened? All I saw was black." At that point, I was really scared. We all rushed outside and tore up the board. It was just a poorly drawn paper board, and burned the pieces. Afterward, Heather said she felt relieved, like a weight had been lifted off her shoulders. We went back inside and sat in the kitchen, talking about what had happened. That's when Heather told me that the last time Jana stayed over, she and her mother both claimed they could see ghosts. Just then, out of nowhere, Jana looked up at Heather's bedroom and said, "A man with no shirt on and brown hair just walked into your bedroom." Have you ever been in a relationship where you knew it was doomed before the first kiss? This story begins there, and I believe it might be linked to some strange experiences I've had. When I was 23, I was playing in a rock band and living the pub and club lifestyle. One night, after a heavy session of rock and roll and too many Jack Daniels, I met a girl with a troubled past. We started dating, and soon she revealed some of her secrets. She had ties to the underworld, a history as a stripper and prostitute, and a drug habit. She told me she was trying to clean up her act and was looking for a fresh start. I decided to stay in the relationship, but it didn't take long for me to realize it wasn't going to work. I'll leave it there. A week or two after we split, she told me she was pregnant. After a lot of personal reflection, we both decided to have an abortion. It was a tough decision, and I have a different view now. I don't want to paint her as a villain, as it takes two to make decisions. I'm being honest here, knowing my wife will be reading this for the first time, and I know it might disappoint her. Years later, I had another experience that I still can't explain. One night, I was lying in bed with the light off, when I rolled over and noticed the closet door was open. Inside, I saw an apparition of a young boy, around 10 years old, sitting in the back of the closet. He was holding his knees, his jet black hair standing out in the dim light. I couldn't figure out who he was or why he was there, but I felt like he was just sitting there, staring at me. This became a recurring event. At least 3 times a week, I'd see the same boy sitting in my closet, staring at me before vanishing out of sight. At this point in my life, I wasn't coping well with my psychic experiences, and I was in denial. I wasn't scared of him, just confused and unwilling to acknowledge what was happening. I regret not trying to communicate with him. Then, one weekend, I went out of town, and when I returned, my mother told me she saw a boy in her room. She described him as looking for something, and when I asked her what he looked like, she said it was the same boy I had seen, including his jet black hair. Around 16 years ago, my wife had a miscarriage. It was a very tough time, especially for her. Later that year, she got pregnant with our son Travis, who has since shared some of these experiences. One night, after rearranging our bed, I woke up suddenly feeling like someone was in the room. I looked at the end of my bed and saw a different boy, about 12 years old, with light brown hair. He pointed toward the closet. I got out of bed to check, and as I approached the closet, the door started to close, as though it were being pulled shut from the inside. I quickly turned on the lamp, feeling more uneasy. When I turned back, the boy was gone, and the closet door was closed. That was the last time I saw either of the boys. I can't say for sure if they were connected to me in any way, but I've thought a lot about the strange coincidences. I wondered if these experiences might be linked to my past. One odd detail is that my ex-girlfriend had jet black hair, and my wife has light brown hair. So I'm left wondering, who were these boys, and why were they appearing to me? I'm not looking for sympathy or to glorify my experiences. I'm just trying to understand them. I've made mistakes in my life, and I regret some of them, but I want to understand what's happening. Maybe the truth is somewhere in your response. This all started when I was 5. I would lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, and I always noticed this one face. It was soft and round, and though I couldn't make out all the details, I could see the head and eyes clearly. Sometimes, I'd wake up startled, hearing footsteps in the hallway. I never had the courage to go to my parents' room, so I would pull the covers over my face and listen as someone walked into my room, sat on my bed, and patted the covers I was under. This would happen about once every 2 weeks for 2 years, until I was around 7. My mom eventually decided to sleep in my room, tired of hearing me talk about my ghostly experiences. When I started kindergarten, I began getting sick often. It wasn't too bad at first, but by the time I was around 8 or 9, I was missing large chunks of school. When I stayed home alone, strange things started happening. While I'd be watching TV in one room, the TVs in other rooms would flicker on and off. Bedroom doors would creak open and then slam shut. Taps would turn on, and the washing machine would start running on its own. My dog would start barking hysterically for no reason. Then, I started seeing a figure, a dark shape, usually in black, staring at me. The figure wore a gray dress, with no eyes, only hollow sockets. It felt like it was staring at me, and it would stay there, staring for what seemed like an eternity. In our house, there's a set of old stairs that lead down to the lower level. When someone walks up, they make a loud clanging noise. Sometimes, I would hear these stairs creaking, as if someone was walking up them. The sound would start quietly, then get louder and louder, as though someone was coming up the stairs, even though no one was home except me. I would run outside into the backyard and hide in the bushes, watching the house. I'd see a figure walking around inside, peering out the back door, giving me a cold, threatening stare, as if to say, "Stay away." There were no eyes, just an expression of hostility. When I was 10, I had another experience. After school one day, I was with my mom, and we got home to find the front door locked. Mom searched for her house keys while I stood outside, looking through the glass door. I said to her, "Mom, there's a black figure." As I stared, a black shape started to approach the door. It got about 3 centimeters away, then disappeared. Mom managed to open the door, but when we went inside, my sister, who had been showering, had no idea how we got in without a key. She said she had been hearing shuffling sounds around the house, like small feet moving about. The strange experiences continued. I'd get sick, and the TVs would flicker. The radio would turn on and off by itself. Chairs would move on their own, and I'd repeat my usual ritual, running outside and hiding in the bush to watch the house. Over time, the figure in the house began to change. It stopped staring at me with a threatening look and started smiling, as if to say, "Don't fear." This change scared me more than the original hostility. By the end of year 4, when I was 10, I started hearing small voices in my head. I became claustrophobic, especially in small spaces like the classroom, where my ears would ring and my chest would tighten. I also began to see that same figure from the corner of my eye. When I looked, it would disappear. Sometimes I'd find notes in my school tray, always with the same message: "Don't fear." One night, I began feeling pressure to do things I normally wouldn't, like untucking a chair. I would place it next to me and then feel a cold presence beside me, like something was reading the same things I was, watching the same videos. But when I looked around, no one was there. Curious about the history of the house, I asked my dad about it. He told me that the house was part of a new estate, and it had been built by a man named Mr. Cavill. The house we lived in was one of his first, and Mr. Cavill lived there until his wife died. I asked about his wife, and my dad said she had died of a heart attack in the house. That's when it hit me. This was the reason for the strange occurrences. There was a spirit in the house, Mrs. Cavill. Since then, the experiences have lessened. I once asked the spirit to leave, telling her that her time was over. Now, I feel like her presence is barely there. I've placed posters of Samara Morgan from The Ring in my room, hoping they'll protect me from any other spirits. I believe they do a good job of keeping the unwanted ones away. I'm still unsure of what exactly Mrs. Cavill wanted, or what type of spirit she was. But I believe she's no longer as active in our home, and I'm grateful for the peace I have now. My boyfriend and I recently moved into an old miner's cottage, which dates back to around 1860 to 1890. The first night we spent there, I immediately felt like we weren't alone. This wasn't my first experience with spirits, but in the past, I had always been able to help them move on without much trouble. However, the spirits in this house seemed a bit upset that we had moved in. Nothing too serious, just a few odd noises and a general feeling of not being welcome. Then, the nightmares started. They were incredibly vivid and hard to shake off. The recurring theme was children dying in different ways, including a dream where my nephew, who's only 3, had a heart attack at the age of 4. After having these disturbing dreams for about a month, I spoke to my sister-in-law. She gave me some crystals and a white candle. I placed the crystals on the mantel in the lounge room and lit the candle, leaving it at that. Afterward, the nightmares stopped, the noises faded, and the atmosphere in the house became much more peaceful. Over time, we've both experienced the presence of different spirits in the house. My partner often wakes up to find a young girl, around 6 or 7 years old, holding his hand or stroking his hair. I haven't had direct contact with her yet, but I've sensed her presence. One spirit, an older man in his 60s, has taken to walking me to the toilet at night, waiting for me to finish before walking me back to bed. He doesn't say anything, but I can feel him there. We also have another spirit in the front room, a sleep-out built after WW1 for a returning soldier. He tends to hang around near the birdcage, and he can be a bit cheeky, nudging me in the ribs, tickling my ear, and laughing. We decided that no one in the house seemed to be harmful, just that the spirits were put out by having new people move in. Everything was fine until last week, when I decided to play some music while cleaning the house. I picked a Shostakovich CD from the rack and started playing it. Within 30 seconds, the CD started skipping, and suddenly, the cutlery I had just washed and placed in the drainer fell all over the sink. The oil guard I had hung on the wall swung violently and nearly flew off the nail. The skipping on the CD got worse, and before it even reached 120, the player stopped reading the CD completely. I took the CD out to check it. No fingerprints, no scratches, no dust. It looked perfectly fine. Just then, my phone rang, so I put the CD back in the player and forgot about it. A few days later, I was folding laundry with my partner when I decided to play music again. I pressed play, and sure enough, Shostakovich started playing. I quickly ran to the CD player and turned it off. My partner looked at me, stunned, and asked, "What just happened?" I explained about the earlier incident with the CD and apologized to the spirits for unintentionally upsetting them again. Things calmed down after that, but my friend, who used to walk me to the toilet, stopped, and the man in the front room became less cheeky. Then, last night, something strange happened. My partner fed the cats and dogs while I fed the birds, mice, and rats. I asked him to bring me a water jug for the front room, and after handing it to me, he left the door slightly ajar. I went about my business, checking on the animals and monitoring the babies we had just had. After about 25 minutes, I made sure everything was in its place, wished everyone good night, and walked to the door. I was surprised to find that the door was now completely shut. It can only be closed from the outside with a sliding bolt lock, and you have to pull on it to line it up. I tried to open it, but it wouldn't budge. I called my partner to come and let me out, and he joked, "I guess you must have really upset the spirits for this to happen." In the summer of 1979, my mother was asked to babysit for one of my grandmother's coworkers who had plans to see a movie with her husband. She had recently given birth to a baby girl and needed someone to watch her for the evening. Since it was a Friday night and my mother had already made plans, my grandmother volunteered to babysit in her place. Their farmhouse was located in a rural community near a small town called Brockville, in southeastern Ontario. The house was in the middle of an expansion and renovation project, and when my grandmother arrived, she expected a quiet night alone with the baby. While the baby was sleeping, my grandmother went upstairs to the master bedroom to watch television. It wasn't long before she heard the sound of movement downstairs in the kitchen. Thinking her coworker had come home early, she went downstairs to greet her. But when she got to the kitchen, she found the entire downstairs area was empty. Confused, my grandmother told herself it was just her imagination and went back upstairs to check on the baby and continue watching television. She had just settled back into the room when she started hearing footsteps slowly climbing the stairs. One detail she always remembered when telling this story was how loud the footsteps were. They were so clear, they drowned out the sound of the television. When she checked the stairs, there was no one there, but the footsteps continued. They were so distinct that she could tell exactly which step the invisible person was on. Terrified, my grandmother stood at the bottom of the stairs, holding her arms out, almost instinctively, as if to block whatever it was from reaching the baby. Then, she felt a cold, damp sensation that was completely foreign to her. As the footsteps moved back down the stairs and the sound suddenly stopped, my grandmother heard another strange noise. It sounded like a large dog scratching at the walls. She was confused, though, because dogs usually scratch at doors, not walls. She went downstairs to investigate and found herself in the living room, which was being renovated. In the corner of the room, she noticed a single pine wood door leaning against the wall. The homeowners came back around 11 p.m. By the time they reached the front door, my grandmother had rushed to open it and left in a hurry, after receiving her payment. She had never been so relieved to get out of there. Even though more than 40 years have passed since that night, my grandmother still remembers the experience clearly. Needless to say, she never went back to that house again. I've only had 2 experiences in my life that I can truly call phenomenal. They're the kind of experiences that make you question everything. The first happened in 1988, and the second one in 2006. When I think about them, I know they'll leave some people scratching their heads in doubt, but here it goes. It was a typical 20-something night. I was at my friend's house with a few others, enjoying some music, beer, and laughter. The night went on until around 4 a.m. I drew the short straw and ended up sleeping on the floor of the lounge room. Around 8 a.m. the next morning, I was woken by a subtle noise. Back then, I had a habit of not opening my eyes immediately when I woke up, because it helped me remember my dreams more clearly. At the time, I was experiencing some small premonitions, a few of which had even saved my life. I was lying on my left side on the floor, and if I opened my eyes, I would have seen the left wall of the room. But here's the strange part. With my eyes still closed, I could see something, what I thought at the time was a ghost. It was a strong, glowing outline, about an inch thick, white or light blue in color, I can't remember exactly. This ghost seemed to move around the room, and I could sense it had a purpose. The noise I was hearing was somehow in sync with the ghost's movements. Now, here's where it gets even more bizarre. I wasn't just seeing this figure in one direction. I could also see it moving around on the other side of the room, as though it was all around me. No matter where it moved, I could track it, without opening my eyes. This wasn't an out-of-body experience. I was fully awake with my eyes shut. I wasn't sure what was happening, and honestly, I was a little scared. This went on for about a minute. I didn't want to open my eyes, hoping whatever it was would disappear. So, I decided to roll over onto my back, hoping that would get it to move on. As I did, the ghost stopped for a moment, and stood at the end of my feet, facing me. Now, it was moving slower, more softly around me, as if it had noticed my movement but wasn't ready to leave. After about 3 minutes, still a little frightened, I decided to open my eyes and face whatever it was. When I did, I was shocked. The ghost wasn't a ghost at all. It was my friend's wife's aura, moving around the room. As soon as I opened my eyes, the glowing outline disappeared, and her physical form was right there in front of me. She apologized for waking me up and explained that she was just cleaning up the lounge room, tidying up from the night before. It was a truly remarkable experience for me, and I've always wondered how I was able to see her aura moving around the room, even though my eyes were shut. Was I seeing some kind of residual energy? Or was it something else? I still can't fully explain it, but I think about it often. Fast forward a few years, and another strange experience happened in 2006. One night, I woke up to go to the bathroom. As I stepped out of our bedroom and into the hallway, which is about 10 meters long, I noticed the light was on. I could see clearly, and as I looked to my right, I saw my wife, not in physical form, but in a spiritual form, walking from the lounge room toward the kitchen. I was intrigued and decided to follow her, thinking I might be able to make contact with her while she was in some kind of out-of-body experience. But as I reached the kitchen, I lost sight of her. Then, I heard a loud bang come from the kitchen wall, a sound I'd heard before whenever loved ones or spirits had visited me. I thought about waking my wife to validate what I had just seen, but decided to wait until the next day. When I asked her about it the following morning, she didn't remember anything. I was a little disappointed, as I had hoped for some kind of confirmation. It left me wondering if I had just imagined it, or if there was something else going on. Years later, my wife remembered me talking about the ghostly aura I saw at my friend's house. She recalled it, which was one small bit of validation for me. So, here's the big question. Is it possible that what I saw was her residual energy, walking around the house? I remember the way she moved and the expression on her face. It was almost as though she was reliving a past moment, performing a chore as if in a time that had passed. Could it be that I was seeing a ghostly imprint of her energy, a residual presence from a previous time? Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Since I was 16, I've had a deep passion for martial arts. After joining a great karate dojo in September of 2004, I achieved black belt status in Shotokan karate and later earned my 4th degree black belt in taekwondo. I was even honored to compete at the US Open World Martial Arts Championships in Orlando, Florida 4 times, and I had the chance to meet Chuck Norris at the 2018 Montreal Comic-Con. Martial arts and stories of the paranormal have always fascinated me, and they have played a significant role in shaping who I am. However, I never imagined that these two interests would one day intersect. In March of 2020, during the early stages of the COVID-19 pandemic, lockdowns were put in place in my hometown of Kingston, Ontario. This led to a shift in my martial arts training, and I began continuing my lessons online, either through Facebook Live or Zoom. By June of that year, I decided to sign up for a virtual martial arts seminar to learn new techniques and to prepare for my upcoming taekwondo grading, which was scheduled for the summer of 2021. The seminar was being held by a well-known martial arts studio in the Greater Toronto area, famous for its high-quality instruction across multiple disciplines. This studio had earned numerous awards over nearly 2 decades of operation and was highly regarded across Canada, the United States, and even Europe. The seminar started around 6:30 p.m., and the instructor kicked things off with a basic kickboxing class. After nearly 45 minutes of intense cardio and boxing drills, the instructor and his assistant decided to take a short break. At this point, the instructor placed his leather kicking paddle on top of a CD player in the far right corner of the studio. As he glanced down at his phone for a moment, something strange happened. The paddle suddenly flew off the CD player and landed about 6 feet away on the red foam mat. It looked as though someone had deliberately slapped it off, as if in a fit of rage. Both the instructor and his assistant were visibly confused, and the participants watching the seminar online were equally puzzled. The reactions quickly started flooding the comments section of the video. As odd as the incident was, the instructor calmly explained that this wasn't the first time something like this had happened. According to him, objects and training equipment had a strange tendency to fly off tables or hooks, even when no one was physically touching them. One example he shared was a padded vest that was supposed to be hung on a wooden peg. On several occasions, the vest would be flung off the hook for no apparent reason, just like the kicking paddle. This left me wondering, could there be a rational explanation for these strange occurrences? Or is it possible that this renowned martial arts studio is home to the ghost of someone who shared the same passion for martial arts that I do? If it is the latter, one thing seems certain. While the spirit's identity may remain unknown, it's clear that it must have a deep connection to martial arts to have chosen such a distinguished studio as its permanent home. From September 2007 to April 2011, I studied history and English online through Lakehead University, located in Thunder Bay, Northern Ontario. In the first week of December 2007, I finally completed my midterm exams. After a stressful weekend of traveling back and forth between Coburg and Oshawa to finish the exams, we decided to celebrate by spending time with my great-aunt at the Oshawa shopping center and doing some early Christmas shopping. By the time the mall was closing, we left to head home. Before dropping my great-aunt off, my brother stopped to get gas. He stepped out of the car to pump, leaving me alone in the car with my great-aunt. Wanting to start a conversation, I told her about our summer trip to Gettysburg, which we took in August of the same year. She listened intently, particularly when I mentioned a strange occurrence during our tour where we heard the sound of rifle shots. In response, she told me about a mysterious experience of her own that I had never heard about before. She explained that this incident occurred during a trip she took to Toronto with my great-uncle just before Christmas in 1989. They had decided to spend the weekend at a luxury hotel and had reserved a room on the 7th floor. My great-uncle, exhausted from the trip, went to sleep early. Not wanting to disturb him, my great-aunt decided to leave the room and take a walk around the hotel. She spent about an hour admiring the hotel's interior design and getting lost in the building's atmosphere. Eventually, she realized the time had passed, and she decided to return to their room. She took the elevator to the 7th floor and began walking back to their room. As she approached the door, she quietly began unlocking it to avoid waking my great-uncle. But halfway through, she suddenly felt the eerie sensation that someone was watching her. She turned to her right and saw a young boy, about 9 years old, standing motionless in the hallway. His expression was blank, and he stared off into space, seemingly lost in his thoughts. Feeling uneasy, my great-aunt asked the boy if he was okay or needed help, but he didn't respond. He just continued staring, as if completely unaware of her presence. She turned back to unlock the door, but when she looked again, the boy was gone. She found herself alone in the hallway. Although she felt deeply unsettled, she decided not to wake my great-uncle and went to bed. The next day, she went to the hotel bar for a glass of wine. She struck up a conversation with the bartender and, after a bit of hesitation, told him about the strange encounter. To her surprise, the bartender didn't question her story. He simply smiled and said, "Yeah, he's been here for years." My great-aunt never learned who the boy was or why he was there. She never found out what might have been going through his mind. Unfortunately, I've long since forgotten the name of the hotel, so I may never uncover the full story behind this mysterious encounter. My aunt, on my father's side, has lived in her house for nearly 35 years. The house is located in a quiet suburban neighborhood just outside the more commercialized area of Kingston, Ontario. For most of her time there, everything seemed peaceful and uneventful. Over the past 6 months, I've visited her multiple times to drop off signed copies of my books and catch up with her before heading off to work. Over the years, I've visited countless times, and nothing unusual ever happened. That is, until I learned about a strange incident that occurred one Saturday afternoon in the summer of 2012. At the time, my youngest cousin was 12 years old. She was feeling bored one Saturday and decided to invite a friend over to spend the afternoon playing video games in the basement. My aunt had recently bought a new Xbox 360 and a copy of the new Just Dance game. For those who aren't familiar, Just Dance is an interactive game where players follow dance moves on the screen to earn points for accuracy. It's a fun, energetic game that usually leads to a lot of laughter, especially when someone makes a mistake. The girls were having a great time, trying to beat each other's scores while enjoying the midday sun that streamed through the basement window. The sunlight hit the room just right, casting their shadows clearly onto the TV screen. Then, in the middle of a song, something caught their attention. They noticed a third shadow standing between them, a small shadow that didn't belong. The shadow appeared to be that of a little girl, maybe 6 years old. Both girls were fully aware that they had come down to the basement alone, and yet, there was this extra, unexplained shadow. They froze, staring at it. The shadow didn't move. It just stood there, motionless. Terrified, they quickly backed away from the TV, and the smaller of the two girls remained frozen in place, too scared to move. The girls eventually ran out of the basement, frightened, and told my aunt about what had happened. My aunt was in the living room, watching TV, and she went downstairs to check it out. When she got there, the shadow was gone, and everything seemed normal. She shut off the TV, and nothing more came of it. The next year, my cousin was celebrating her birthday and told one of her friends about the strange encounter from the previous year. Her friend, who claimed to be psychic, was intrigued and suggested they check the basement again. My cousin agreed, and they went downstairs together. After a moment of scanning the room, the psychic friend said she saw a faint image of a small girl sitting in the far left corner of the basement. Since then, no other incidents have occurred, but I remain fascinated by this experience. I can't help but wonder if I might encounter this mysterious phenomenon myself the next time I visit.